So I, a 13-year-old Mal, and a couple of friends, let's call them EDZS and G, went exploring this barn last year. It is creepy. We found two knives, one old working toy in the attic, and some other weird stuff. First time, nothing too weird, but it gives me the creeps. Next time, last summer at the start of autumn, my two friends E and D went to check it out and see what they could do. It didn't go as planned. They saw a white man-like creature in the barn and one outside who was actually spying from the bush. They ran for their bikes and they watched the creature do some, I don't know what, not really normal activity. Now for the second encounter, it was like around 2 weeks ago, since I got injured mid-autumn and basically couldn't do anything during the winter. We went there to do random stuff and mess around like 13-year-olds do and search the barn. Things were a little misplaced, nothing new. After that, we go to check out the nearby forest at about 6 p.m, and it's dark outside now. We go by the forest and look inside and we hear something. Some gibberish, I don't know. We watch because we're obviously scared and it creeps me out to see some white creatures running around. We ran like 40 meters away and watched. Something came out of there and shouted. Don't know if we should go back or explore or not. Does anyone know anything similar happening elsewhere? One summer, my boyfriend and I drove up and down California and just slept in the bed of his truck. One day, we went to the Emerald Pools near Lake Tahoe. We ended up crashing near a public campground nearby. There was maybe about one other person or so, as well as a campground host. In the middle of the night, I woke up and had a weird feeling. I sat up and realized that the passenger side of the door had suddenly swung open. Now we'd locked ourselves in, and it shouldn't have been able to do that. So we quickly close it and go asleep, but I'm creeped out for the rest of the night and I'm not able to sleep at all. It was literally like somebody swung the door open, but nobody had touched it, and it was locked. While stationed in a protected forest, I remembered sitting up with a few of my buddies having some coffees when we saw somebody wave to us, turn and literally walk through a tree, then literally disappear only moments after. None of us can explain what happened. Now for a little bit of a backstory, I've always had weird experiences, be it ghosts or strange animals. It just always seemed to follow me and my family. We had just moved into an old farmhouse just off the main road. The house comes with 88 acres of land and only 4 people live on or near the land, including us. When we first moved in, nothing abnormal happened. It was just a small out of the way home that seemed like a new start for all of us. After about a month of us living here, we started hearing strange noises outside at night, but nothing serious. One night, we decided to have a fire and get drunk, while me and a few other guys that were there that night decided to do some night fishing. So we're fishing in the pond basically, and we start to hear some screaming off in the woods. We just think that it's one of the girls back at the house, so we head back on our way and started noticing that there's no more sounds. No sounds of nature, no birds, no crickets, nothing, so we stop to listen. As we do this, we hear the sounds of chains rushing towards us as it gets maybe 15 feet in front of us. I point a gun at where I think the sound has stopped, and fire is shot into the ground a couple of inches from it. After a minute passes, the chains rush to the house, but nothing happened. After that, we all go inside and start heading to bed. We all then hear a female scream again, but behind it, there was a deep distorted laugh. After that, nothing happened until 3 weeks later, me and my dad go fishing out at the pond late in the afternoon. As it inches closer to dusk, we notice 3 pale white animals on the opposite side of the pond, but as soon as we notice the animals, we realise that they're running on all fours, but in a weird way, and they jump up on their hind legs and jump about 8 feet into a tree and then hop away from tree to tree. As we see this, we decide to head back home, but on the way we hear the trees start rustling, and it keeps getting closer and closer until we just get to the house and lock the doors. I decide to set up cams in the woods and around the house. At first I don't get anything, just deer and wolves, until on a night cam close to the house, I realise that there's a camera that's moved on its own. Nothing really came of that one night, however. After a long day of working, I decide to play a video game with some friends. It's about 11 at night and I hear 2 taps, but I ignore them thinking it's a game. It continues till 2 in the morning, periodically every 5 minutes or so. 2 consecutive taps are happening. I finally took off my headphones and hear it at my window, and when I look, I see orange eyes about 7 feet off the ground. After 2 minutes of staring at each other, it moves closer to the window and smiled at me with blood-stained daggers for teeth. Its face looks like a pale wolf's face with some decay on the sides of its neck and head. After doing this, it backs away and leaves. Now every night, right around that time, something weird happens like the sounds. I don't know what it could be. I'm always hearing this horrifying laugh like some kind of demented hyena or something. I'll let you guys know if anything else happens, I just can't figure out what this is. I currently work as a park ranger, and you do get some odd things happening, but I'm not somebody who's been blessed with a terrible experience. I say blessed sarcastically here. However, I did have some strange things happening to me when I was younger, and long before I ever took up this occupation. Let me take you back to my childhood. My father was somebody who went hunting often. I can remember so many nights up in the tree stands with my dad. These are really some of the best times that I ever had in my life. Even now, from time to time, I find myself reminiscing and looking back on them, just thinking of how great it was. I know not everybody has the ability to experience things like this, so it was something that I'm truly grateful for. I remember while we're up there one time, there's a really weird smell that comes. It was kind of like a really foul smell, like something was rotten. My dad's pretty convinced that an animal's died around here, and he says, "You know what that means, son? We're gonna find something. Some animal's gonna come past it and we're gonna get it." I was really excited. My dad has the rifle in its case, so he had a really expensive one. I can't remember exactly what gun he had though, but it was a pretty cool one, just know that. So we're up there for a while and not too much is happening. To be honest, I think either the smell gone or we got used to it, because I can't remember smelling it much more. We wait for a while here, then I see something. There's some kind of movement up ahead. I go to wake up my dad, worried that a person's come, but he's fast asleep. I don't think too much of it and decide to fall asleep again. Now, you're not really supposed to sleep up here, but we were both really tired from the hike, so I thought it was only going to be like it for a little while. Just as I fall asleep, I can see what appears to be 2 people standing next to each other watching us where we are. I thought, well, maybe they're other hunters, and I just had the benefit of the doubt in my head that it was all okay. So I fall asleep, and I hear a really strange sound. It sounds like constant tapping, like somebody was trying to break a lock. I'm really disorientated when I woken up, and I actually thought that I was at home, so I thought we were being robbed in the downstairs area of our house. You know when you're not used to sleeping somewhere and it takes you a few seconds to figure out where you are when you wake up? Well, it was just like that, and it takes me a while to get used to this. However, after not too long, I quickly come back to my senses, and I look out, and I can see a figure walking around very slowly in the distance. It was weird though, it looked like it was moving in slow motion. This person had a massive torso but quite skinny arms, just kind of lumbering around. It looks almost like they're injured, and I say, Dad, wake up. Dad, I think someone's trying to rob us. I was still a little bit hazy. My dad says, no, son, it's nothing. Just go back to sleep. I say, Dad, yeah, there's definitely something there. But he says, no, son, just go back to sleep. It's fine. Now, I don't know what was wrong with my dad. He just seemed very tired and dismissive of everything I was saying. Maybe it was because of my age at the time that he didn't really believe me or whatever, but he decides to go to sleep again, and eventually I do the same. Now, I slept really well that night. I think it was because I'd been woken up a few more times than my dad had, so I didn't really get into a good circadian rhythm. Now, when I do wake up, I see my dad outside looking around. I say, Dad, what's wrong? And I go down off of the stand. I feel $1 million because of how I slept. My dad looks confused. I say, what's wrong? And he says, well, there's something weird here. The animals that we caught and killed, they've all long gone, and I can't figure out where. It was quite weird because then we noticed something really odd. There was a pile of bones, but they were bone dry. It was almost like somebody had just really perfectly preserved the bones, which appeared to be like the animals that my dad had caught earlier, and just left them in a small neat pile. There was also the smell again, which was even worse than before. I had to look around for a while on my own to try and figure out if there was an animal that had died. I don't know, maybe a bear or something crazy like that, but there was nothing. I remember seeing a look of concern in my dad's face. I've never really seen this before. I've always looked up to my dad as being this very brave person, but on this particular day, he didn't look so confident. I don't know what it is. So then we head back. Now, my dad decides to take a walk by the water of the lake near where we are. He usually does this if he's stressed and that he wants to just have a walk and trying to relax and forget about everything. I start questioning my dad, and he says, I'm sorry, I just don't know what it was. It's clear that he's definitely concerned, but he doesn't want to tell me what it was. Now, the place we are actually looks beautiful. If any of you have ever played Halo before and went to the beaches there on the mongooses or the warthogs, you'll know what I mean. Where it's got kind of like the lovely rock formation that leads to the ocean. It was just like that up here. I'm actually having a really good time, but I realised the smell was very distinct that I smelt earlier, and it's again like something that I've never smelt before. There were some other people here and someone that my dad was actually friends with who had some dogs and stuff. The guy then says to my dad that he doesn't know why, but the dogs are acting really weird. He said he's never seen them act like it before. I think my dad's going to say about what he saw and what happened, but he doesn't really say anything. He just turns to his friend and said, well, be careful out there, buddy. And they shook hands and just started talking about other things. The other kid there wanted to play with me, but he was a bit younger and I wasn't in the mood for it. I could sense something had happened that hadn't before to my dad, and I didn't necessarily sense danger from it. I just felt like it was a bit surreal, because I'd just gone from that relatively scary experience to looking out on a beautiful water formation, and it did actually relax me. The thing was, we had a few more days where we needed to remain here. Our original plan was to spend quite a while out here and just go back every so often to get supplies. That wasn't an issue. I decided to explore the rock formation a bit more on my own. It was quite sunny now, and actually annoying because I didn't have my hat with me. I realised that I've lost my camouflage hat. I was pretty crushed by this because I loved those things, but that was fine. I was now looking for crabs and other things, and I noticed some weird shells. That's when I noticed that one of the dogs starts going crazy. It just wouldn't stop barking. The owner's constantly calling his name, but he doesn't respond, so he has to put him back onto a leash. Again, I think this is quite a weird thing, because I've not seen this dog behaving like this before. And that's when I hear it. Some kind of terrifying crackling laugh, or maybe howl, very deep in nature, and it makes everything stop. all the animals, including the birds, seemed to just stop in their place at this sound. It was like they knew something was up and we didn't, or at least we didn't know the scale of it. My dad and his friend just looked at each other and agreed it was weird, like maybe a bear or something, but I think in his mind he knew it wasn't a bear, being quite experienced out here. I was quite scared of it being a bear, but luckily we're armed and our guns can take on bears, luckily. But I didn't really want to put it to the test. My dad's friend decides to get out of there with the dog spooked, and now it's just me and my dad out here. We spent a while actually along the coast just exploring before deciding to eventually head back again. I asked my dad, what do you think that thing was? And he says, probably nothing, seeming much more calm now. I think in my head, hold on, why are you telling me that now? You looked so scared earlier. That's weird. But I guess my dad was a bit arrogant and I thought, well, we're probably safe out here. So we start heading back to our camp again. We're just eating some food, so our bellies are full, and I guess that made us feel better. But I couldn't figure out why my dad wasn't too worried. I mean, if there was a bear, we didn't want to be out here with it. We'd probably win the fight, but who wants to test that? It was strange. As we are walking, and we now transition from kind of the beachy setting almost back into the woods, there was that strange smell once more. It was almost like every so often you get peppered with it. The thing was, this time it almost made me feel lightheaded. I can't be certain it was because of the smell, but it was definitely odd. But we continued on. My dad said that he wants to actually go to another stand that he knows about now. I asked him, what do you think that is? And he says, well son, there's a lot of things we know about in this world and out in nature. There's a lot of things that we don't know. We're only a part of this, not above it. Even now I think of that saying actually. It's really interesting. Though I couldn't entirely grasp the depth of it at the time. So we're heading back, and every so often I do get the feeling like we're not alone out here. Yes, there could have been other hunters and things, but I didn't think that was too realistic. I keep looking over at the water in the lake every so often. I then see it though. Once more, someone's there. It's just like the figure I'd seen before. My dad stares at it for a while, struggling to see it. I say, Dad, get the binoculars quick. He can't find them. We've left them in the stand, which is really annoying. I said, we'll just use a rifle. No. Come on, Dad, just do it. We're going to figure out what this is now. My dad refuses once again, saying, no, we don't know who that is. I'm not going to aim the rifle at anyone. He had a really good point, but I don't understand why he couldn't have just took the scope off or something to have a look at this thing. He does seem to keep the gun pointed towards it though, which I thought again is really odd. Now it's there for a while just staring at us. It kind of looks like a lost person on the beach, very far away, but potentially looking in our direction or that of the ocean. It's impossible to tell because of the distance between us, but it was definitely looking somewhere. Now we continue on, and that's when we start to notice some weird things. There are some trees which are pushed down which should never have been. It's not all the time, just every so often. At first I think maybe it was a lightning strike or something, but upon closer investigation I realised that there's no burn marks at all. I'm not sure if we should be out here, but for whatever reason my dad decides to persist that we need to get back to the other stand. We're walking for what feels like an eternity and eventually stop for a little while just to have a break. It's while doing this that I actually calm down a bit further, and we walk onto a little wooden part which is man-made, which made me feel a lot better. We've set up our food now, and we have another meal. I seem to be especially hungry. I think it's probably because I was more nervous than I realised, and that might have been burning up a lot of energy. But everything felt different here. It felt like we were going to a completely foreign land, like we just moved to a completely different area of the forest. almost like somebody just cut and pasted a different terranium into here. The trees all seem to be somewhat haunted looking, not full of life like the other ones, but seeing those wooden paths made me feel more confident. And with this we get to the other stand, and we head up in there. My dad lets me go first. He then says that he's going to look around for a while to try and scout out anything for us to hunt. I say good idea, Dad. He leaves me there and I actually have a rifle too now. He didn't often trust me with one, but in this situation he did. We've got two, both which go into the same case. My dad always carried it because it was quite heavy. I was pretty good with it actually and spent lots of time at ranges and places like that which were privately owned, so I really honed my skills in. I knew how to operate it safely, but this was a big thing. I remembered staring at the gun with wide eyes thinking, wow, I don't want to let my dad down. I put it onto its safety mode and just sat there quite peacefully for a while. I remembered that after not too long I drifted off to sleep again. I mean, I didn't realise how tired I could get so easily, but this was different for me. It was honestly like my body was put under a spell or something. Now while up here, I notice a strange screamy sound again. It jolts me awake and I try and focus my eyes on what it was. I shouldn't have done it, but I grabbed the rifle and load up a round. Now, I'm looking through the scope trying to see what it was. I don't actually have my hand towards the trigger though. I know this is dangerous and stupid, but I was quite young, so I didn't really care. Then, just through the edge of my sights, I can see something standing making this horrible howling sound. It appears to be standing over the corpse of some kind of animal, and I'm certain that I can see blood dripping down off of it. Every so often, it would stop making the sound where it appeared to be eaten, but I can't be 100% sure. I say, Dad, Dad, and I can't find my dad. Then, I hear it, a ping, a loud bang. The rifle's gone off. God, I think, as I drop the gun in front of myself, then quickly grab it again. I quickly checked to see if the rounds went off, but it hasn't. It wasn't my own. Then, I realise that it's my dad's shot around. I say, Dad, Dad. I don't hear any response, so I start panicking, thinking it's somebody else. I look up towards wherever that creature is and there's nothing there. I then see my dad come in. He's pointing his rifle in that direction the whole time and eventually makes it up into the stand. I say, Dad, where did you go? What happened? He says, well, I thought someone was following us, so I decided to have a scout around. Eventually I saw it. Some kind of, I don't know what it was, standing over an animal. Tried to hit it, but I missed. I now realise that they were warning shots, so whatever it is now long gone, but it was definitely weird. I keep asking my dad again and again, can we go and check it out please? I really want to see what it is, but my dad refuses. He actually puts up the barrier on the stand now. We're able to use it to rest our guns on though, which is good. He then explains that he doesn't know what's happening in the woods and that he wants us to go a bit sooner than normal. I was quite hesitant because I loved these times, but I understood. He then said, why did you put a round in? And I explained that I saw the thing too. He said, what do you think it was, son? And I say, I don't know, but it was eating something. And that's what my dad agrees with too. So we settle in for the night. When I wake up, I can see my dad looks a bit restless. He was never one who slept for very long, and I can see he's a bit tired today. I asked him why is he sleepy, and he said he couldn't sleep well, but I think that he was just up on guard. So, now we head out again towards where the water is, just to wash off our things and whatnot, and just to relax a little bit. After not long of being down there, we bump into another person. This person looks quite weird though. He isn't dressed normally. He's kind of dressed like how the folks that live out of nature on their own do. He's got some kind of wooden tent, whatever it is, set up near the water on the rocks. I go over and try and speak to him and ask has he seen anything, and he says, yeah, There's weird things out here, man. There's all kind of squatches and everything. They don't know about it, man. I felt nervous immediately. He's definitely a weird one. And my dad comes over and starts trying to talk to him. The guy just says over and over again and again, you gotta watch yourself, man. There's things out there. There's things out there. My dad says, where are you from and how long have you been out here? And he says he doesn't know. It's clear this guy hasn't come into contact with people for quite a long time. He was probably the strangest fellow that I'd met in my life up to that point, and it felt weird. Again, the atmosphere seemed to change as we come over to the water. He was really weird looking, and my dad takes me away from him. We cut our little respite short and start walking along the shoreline. I'm actually looking for crabs and things again because I want to eat one, but there are none. My dad starts laughing and I do, saying about how weird that guy seemed to be. It's really like that guy had just come out of the middle of nowhere and just appeared, almost like he was dropped there by a helicopter or something and hadn't seen normal people for years. It was weird. I then asked my dad, do you think he saw the same thing we did? But he says, I don't know, I think he's seen everything, but it's not real. That was the only time I started to settle down really on this trip. We started to wonder if maybe that guy was dressing up in some kind of weird animal suit and acted strange out there. I think my dad was more worried that he potentially shot near a person, but I don't know. We then come up to another part where the forest starts. We're going to head back to the original stand now. It looks very halo-y again, like I said before, but it looks kind of cool. After not too long, we start heading back into the forest once more. Okay, I go on and on though about my dad, that I want to go back and see what that thing was. Come on, let's go and figure out what it was, Dad. Don't you want to see what it was? I keep on persisting like that annoying child, trying to just figure out exactly what that animal was. Who knows what it could have been, but my dad says no, we're not gonna go. I was annoyed because the direction that we're heading basically takes us really far away from it, and I don't want that. But my dad just refuses, actually getting annoyed now, and I said, alright, fine, just because you don't want to solve the mystery. I think my dad's mindset was more survival and protective, but mine was more like that of a young person that I was. So just trying to investigate everything and just see what was truly out there. Now we continue on. The sun's shining quite nicely, but the trees are luckily providing lots of shade for us at this point. So it's very nice to be out there in the woods and nature. My dad actually looks like he was losing some kind of weight, so I think that's a pretty good sign that he was as nervous as anybody at that point. So he keeps on going, and eventually we get nearer to the stand, and that's when we hear it. A very loud scream. This one is very classical of what you'd expect from a large animal, but it doesn't sound like a bear. So that leaves me with the question, what could it have been if it wasn't a bear? What could have been making such a loud sound out there, really in the middle of nowhere? I don't know. But we keep going once more. After about 5 or so minutes, we come up to where the stand is, and the place looks trashed at the bottom. My dad seems annoyed, saying, God, what are these other hunters doing? You're not supposed to trash it like this. No one is. But that's when it gets weird. There are some markings on the trees, like something with large claws has had a go at it. Now it seems like somebody's really had a chance to hack down the tree. Maybe Wolverine, I don't know. That's honestly what it appears like. We think this is really weird because there's no signs of trash or anything that would make it apparent or obvious that a person has actually been here. It's really bizarre to see. I even had a scout round myself trying to look for something or signs of anybody else being out here. I thought maybe somebody gone for a walk and was getting annoyed that they couldn't use the stand or something. But it's weird. I remembered faintly thinking I could smell that smell again, but I seem to be completely used to it now, so I guess I was kind of noseblind to it if it was actually there. My dad decides to do some exploring though and tells me once again to wait up in the stand, gives me some snacks to eat and hands me a rifle. Wow, this is so cool, I think to myself. I'm mesmerized once again, where I was being trusted with the gun. Again, something that seldom happened for me, so things were looking up a bit now. I remembered looking at the thing, holding it, and just having to play around, trying to remember everything, and I started practicing reloading quickly. There wasn't much else I could do, so that's what I'm doing time and time again. Then, I suddenly stop. I had a feeling that I should stop now, and just wait for a few seconds. I hold my breath as I hear some kind of movement. I can't hear much else. It doesn't sound like my dad. The movement is coming through the trees and seemingly getting closer and closer to where I am up in that stand. I hold my breath now. It's already starting to get dark. Since when did it get dark so quickly? Why is it so dark here? I think to myself as I try and figure out what's going to happen next. My hands are now trembling as I get the rifle ready to shoot whoever's coming. Then I hear a loud sigh and sneeze. The sneeze was loud enough to make me jump. It's my dad. My dad has the loudest sneeze in the world, so I knew it was definitely him. I then swear and tell my dad off for making me jump. I say, "Why are you being so quiet?" He says, "I just have a feeling that there's something else here." He says, "You weren't going to shoot me, were you, as a joke?" And I said, "No, of course not, but my god, I probably wasn't far away from it." It's something I'm kind of ashamed of now. I let my fear take over, but how could I not in that moment? My dad eventually comes up in the stand and he has some chocolate with him. I immediately forget about everything and start munching on the chocolate. I think my dad's maybe trotting some kind of animal remains, and we do look around for a bit. I'm trying to see if I've got it on my shoes, but I don't, and my dad doesn't. It's a really bad smell. This is different from the one we had before. As the night falls this time, a mist settles, making it look like it's kind of from a different time of the year to what we were. I haven't seen mist like it before too. Maybe that's why the smell was carrying so far. Maybe animals were dying and we didn't know why. They seemed to be dying all around us. It was weird. Well, I didn't dwell on this for too long. I eventually finished the chocolate and we decided to settle in for the night once more. We're up for hours and we do not see anything whatsoever. It's really annoying because we're going to have to come back empty-handed. I don't understand where all the animals went that my dad found earlier. They seem to have just vanished. It's really odd. We decide that when we're going to go to sleep that we should put the tarp up this time. It's something that we rarely did, but it was a bit more cold now, so it felt better that way, and we do so, and we settle in for the night. Now, I'm awoken by rattling on the side of the tarp. That's bizarre. For a few seconds I thought it was my dad, but I looked to my left and my dad's up, aiming the rifle. Now, panic sets in, and my dad says, "Don't move a muscle," in a hushed tone. Something is now sniffing the outside of the tarp, trying to get in. What's crazy is it sounds like it goes to the outside of where we are. We're up a tree. How on earth could that thing have got on the other side? It would have meant this thing's impossibly tall or has freakishly long arms, as we hear the odd tap on the side, sometimes more aggressive. There was one point where part of the wood actually bent in towards us, then relaxed again. I thought the whole thing was about to come down. This continues on and I grab my rifle too and start aiming it too. Now this goes on for at least 3 minutes where something is trying to get into where we are. And then, suddenly, it just stops. We hear the sound of something going down from the ladder and the side of the tree. It hits the ground, and then we don't hear anything. That's a weird part. We can't figure out what direction it's went in. My dad then slowly peeks down and around from the top. He slowly aims it from the left and then to the right. I can see that he's sweating a lot now. He says, "Son, wait here." I say, "Dad, no, you're crazy." He says, "Son, stop. I'm not actually going out." I thought that he was going to get out, but he's just putting his head out basically. I decide to aim my rifle in the opposite direction. I don't know what that thing was. The smell is absolutely appalling at this point. It smelled like 1,000 dead things rolled into the size of a bathtub had just been dropped on top of our stand. That's when we realise there's blood dripping from the top of it. At first I'm worried it's my dad, but I realise it's not him. I notice it's not myself too, but it's kind of a dark colour. It's not like any other blood that I've seen before. Luckily none of it gets on us. Then my dad slowly gets down. He has a look around and I go to do the same, but he sends me back up. He then says, "Son, grab your stuff." I start to collect everything together and I slowly walk down the steps in the moonlight. It looks like the tree's been destroyed. It literally looks like Wolverine's climbed up the side of it. But there's something which is dead, clearly, on the top of our stand. You can see maybe a deer's leg or something covered in blood. You can see its own blood, but then another much darker kind next to it. It's hard to say because we're in the moonlight, but I don't know what this thing is. My dad then says, "Come," and he tells me to lead the way. I can't believe he's trusting me out of here, but he's telling me basically to head back to where safety is, back to the main area. He's going to cover behind us, and we start walking. At first I'm going slow, but my dad says, "Son, you've got to go quick here." He didn't have to tell me twice as I pick up the pace myself. We start going now, back to back. We're walking for a long time. The smell doesn't seem to leave us though, which is especially odd. I hear a strange echoey voice too every so often. It's very faint, but it sounds like a wounded animal, kind of making some kind of cries as it slowly passes away. It's really haunting, especially with just the moonlight here, but eventually it gets brighter and brighter, and we continue like this for literally hours. Neither of us really said much. I turned into a soldier on a mission now. My arms are getting tired though from holding the rifle, and eventually I put it down for a second and my dad picks it up, putting it in the case and shouldering it. He's still got his one. He obviously felt a lot more safer now at this point, as we keep making our way through the woods. We're doing this forever when eventually my dad says okay, and puts the rifle back. He's got both of them in the same case now. He says we can't be out here pointing rifles around in case anybody else comes. And we walk for probably another 3 or so hours. We've literally been walking for miles and miles now, and we're slowly getting closer and closer to where we can get the rest of the way home. We eventually get back to my dad's car and we throw everything in. I somehow knew not to say anything to my dad, and he slowly starts up the car and we head home in silence. We have since spoke about the incident many times, and both of our stories of what happened match up exactly. Even the drawings of what we both saw are basically identical. Now, my dad made me promise not to tell anybody else about what had happened, and I didn't really for a long time. Neither of us could figure out what happened to us this day. The closest thing that either of us can think of is if it was some kind of deranged bear or Sasquatch, but the bear theory doesn't seem to make sense. They're not really known for the area that we went in, and I don't see how it could have put something on top of our stand like that. I don't know what it is. Sometimes when I fall asleep and hear a loud sound, it really takes me back to that moment. I don't like it. Growing up, I'd spent much of my life playing outside with my friends. This is in the days before you had video games and things like that, so it was pretty normal to make your own fun. All I'd have to do is take my bike, and after riding for about an hour or so, I'd be with my friends. I know that sounds like a long time, but I lived out in the backwoods, miles away from cars, so it wasn't really dangerous and it didn't feel so long because you're out in the woods. Now, later in my career, I became a park ranger, so I kind of got used to weird people and weird situations, but this is something that I couldn't explain from my childhood. Now, this actually comes from a number of things that happened to me, which all led to one specific event. So let me begin. So, I was playing out with my friends on one particular day, and one of my friends swears that he's seen a house out in the woods, deep in the middle of nowhere, but he knows exactly where it is. And he says, "God, there's a woman that haunts it and it's so scary. I really need you guys to see it." Now, we knew he wasn't making it up because when his brother came back from vacation, he was also saying the same thing. So one day we set out to find this. We had our bikes with us originally, but had to quickly dismount them. We decided to leave them because we knew it was going to be too difficult to proceed. There were rocks and things everywhere, so it was going to be really a headache to travel with them, so we decided not to. Now, we do notice some people further up also on bikes, and one, we have no idea how that they could have been on bikes out here because of how rough the terrain is, and two, we've seldom seen people here, so we thought it was a pretty bizarre thing, but we don't think too much of it and continue on. Now, funnily, this friend almost immediately gets lost and can't figure out where it is. He's basically adamant to not give up on trying to find it, but he doesn't really have a clue of where he's going. The nature's very nice though, but we're on quite a narrow path which is quite sheer. If you fell, you wouldn't really break anything, but you definitely get hurt. I've actually had the honour of falling in once and it wasn't fun. I ended up getting quite a lot of cuts and things and messed up some of my clothes, which was quite annoying. Now, after not too long, my friend finally gives up and says that we're not going to find this place. I say yeah, that's fine, and we decide to start heading back. Now, I kid you not, just as we've started to turn around, we hear a really deep banshee type scream, one that echoes off the surrounding hills. It was far too loud to be a person. At the very least it would have been a large animal, but upon listening to the scream over the 2 seconds it lasted, you could hear some distinct words being spoken, and that was to get out. It's very hard to really figure out exactly what this voice was saying because I had so much adrenaline that I just couldn't focus on what I was hearing. But I look at my friends, and my friend who then led us out there confirmed that yes, he actually heard the same thing. Now we're panicking. As you can imagine, being young kids, we basically scream too and sprint out in the opposite direction. The best part about this is that we don't really know where we're going, and we ended up getting more lost in the woods. Now, I ended up getting really bad because it starts to get dark, and one, I don't want to lose my bike. My parents have only just got me it, and growing up I really didn't have much money. So if I lost the bike it was going to be a big thing, but yeah, I really couldn't find it, and that was quite worrying. And two, I didn't want to be out here in the dark with the demon. And my parents were going to kill me if I wasn't back in time. Filled with more rage now, I start strutting around trying my very best to find where the bikes could be, and thankfully we found them. Now we all split off in our different directions, and none of us really say anything. We're just rushing to try and get back home. I've never pedalled so hard in my life because I was absolutely convinced that the demon thing was going to chase after me. I know now it could have just been a person out there, or maybe a large animal. That was probably the biggest threat, but I guess back then you really don't think like that. So I was pretty concerned by this, and I well and truly didn't feel comfortable. I just knew that I had to find my way home safely. So I get in and I get banned from being on my bike for a while, which was really annoying. I didn't really explain what had happened to my parents. I knew I was going to be grounded, and I thought, you know what, this is going to be a lot worse for me if I say what's actually happened. I know looking back on it now, I should have probably explained, because it could have been a really dangerous situation. Who knows what was out there that day? Well, I'll tell you who doesn't know, me. So now fast forward a couple of months. My friend is still going on about us trying to find this place, and I kind of didn't want to this time. Normally I'm one of the real adventurers in the group, but I just couldn't be bothered. I didn't want to lose my bike luxuries again because I've just lost them, but he persists, and I guess we had nothing better to do, so I say sure. Now, I remember the day that we're going to set off again. He said that he knows the exact place this is. You know why? He said he had a dream about it. Being young, I really bought into this and thought, you know what, this time we're actually going to find it. So, we're riding down the path this time. We're actually on the more concrete area, which leads into the main part of the forest, and we were going really quick. Next thing I know, I'm hitting the ground hard. My hands are stinging, and something was off. I realised that I've crashed on my bike. I'd stupidly tried to go off onto what appeared to be a more flat part of the path, but I've gone straight over a big stone and ended up getting some cuts on myself. I didn't worry too much about it though. I was sat down for a while, and I tell my friends that they should just go on without me and that I need to get back home. I was young, but I was still quite concerned by this and ruining my clothes. I didn't want to get blood all over them. I know I have to get back to my mum. Now my friends, being the great friends they are, say sure and head off without me and leave me there. I look at the bike and it seems a little bit stuffed at first. I can't get the wheels to turn, so I ended up just laying there for a while. Now that's when I noticed someone. There's an elderly woman approaching. She's coming from just beyond the tree line up to my right. I look ahead and see if my friends are there to confirm if they're seeing this too, but they aren't. They're long gone. I'm a little bit worried now and very hastily get up and start trying to make my bike move. I'm trying to get the wheels to work, but I just can't seem to do it. For some reason I had a feeling that she was coming to help me, but she gets a little bit closer and just stops, smiling at me. Now she has some of the most jagged and rotten teeth that I've ever seen before. It's like this person had never seen a toothbrush in their life. Weirdly, their clothes didn't seem too dirty, considering that she's just come from the forest and surely they should have some markings on them. She's wearing a kind of dark coloured dress, but it looks pretty immaculate. If I had to guess her age, I'd say she's probably about 70 or 75. I'm not too sure. I wave at her and don't get anything back. I then say hello, and suddenly her expression changes, looking completely blank, almost like it's looking through me. Now that was creepy. I can't really make out much about her eyes because she has pretty bloodshot eyes, so I quickly get my bike, pick it up, and thankfully the wheels start moving while I'm walking. I look over my shoulder and I can still see her there watching me. For some reason I wasn't overwhelmed with fear by this, as I know a lot of people might be. This is kind of uncharacteristic for me too, because often I am the scaredy cat, but not in this situation. I start pedaling slowly at first, but I then see that she's still there staring at me, and as you can imagine I picked up the pace pretty promptly. Now I ended up getting back home, and my mum's very concerned about me. Annoyingly, she put this stinging stuff all over my cuts. I mean, it's probably antiseptic whatever, but my god did it burn like I've never felt a burn before. Honestly, it almost sent my whole body into shock how strong this stuff is. It was so much so that I'd actually forgot about what had happened until my mum asked again. I say I crashed over the stone, and then the lady come. My mum says, "What lady?" and asks me to describe her. And I explain everything that happened, and she looks at me kind of weird. She knows that there's no cars around there for miles. It's just the paths. You might get the odd truck, but it was very uncommon. She tells me that if ever I see that lady again, to come straight back and don't try and talk to her. I say, "But Mum, I couldn't even talk to her." I get the reply of, "I don't want to hear it." I'm then grounded and lose my bike privileges again. So it's starting to get quite irritating now. So not only are my friends out having this great adventure, I've crashed my bike on flat ground, hurt myself and got grounded again. I was pretty worried now because usually my mum does the 3 strikes and you're out kind of way of things. If I lose a bike again, I don't know if I'll see it again. So I'm pretty upset. Now eventually my mum does release me from her prison and I'm allowed to go out. And I catch up with my friends and ask them what happened. They then say that they still couldn't find it and I started laughing. They then ask why I'm not allowed on my bike and I explain and my friend says that's her. That's the lady who lives there. I say, "What do you mean?" He says, "The lady that haunts the house, you saw her." And I'm not buying any of it. I say, "The day I believe you is the day I see the house." And what happens? Nothing for the next 2 months. Until eventually I get my bike back and it's time to go out once more. In the time without my bike, I'm actually super bored because I'm basically stuck indoors all day and I'm just watching the days go past. I did get some video games in, so I just killed hours on it, but it couldn't compete with being with my friends. Now, we decide that we're going to set out one last time to try and find this house. Again, I really don't believe it's there. I don't believe any of it's true, but my friend constantly goes on about it. So now, we get on that path once again, and this time I'm constantly scanning the ground. I'm very scared to go over another rock again and get hurt. It's not actually the feeling of crashing that actually bothers me, it's more the fact that I don't want to have a crash and get that stinging stuff on me. The thing was, at this point, even if we did find anything, I was sure to just lie about it, because I think, what's the point of telling my mom about what's happened if I'm only going to get grounded again? So I swear that no matter what happens, I'm not going to tell her anything. Now we were riding for miles and miles, and eventually my friend said, "Stop," and we all stop. He says, "Leave our bikes here." We take them off to the side and actually throw them into the bushes so people can't find them. They're pretty well concealed now, which is something we're all happy about. Now we get up and we start going through the woods on this little path. My friend is absolutely convinced and certain that this is the way that we need to go to be able to get away from everyone and finally find where this house is. He says, "This is it. This is what I found before." None of us really believed him, but I guess being gullible, part of us wanted it to be real. Now we walked for miles and miles, and we still don't seem to be getting any closer to anything. I tell him, "Really, is this actually a thing or is it just a figure of your imagination?" He then says, "Be quiet." And I don't, I just keep on going until eventually, there it is. In a break in the trees, you can see an old white house. It kind of looked like an old English cottage, but slightly bigger. It certainly looked old and very abandoned. It was 2 stories tall, and looked like nobody had been there for as long as I had been alive, at least 5 times over. Now at this point I get a little freaked out, but my friend is persistent that we have to press forward to find it. We have to go in there. We have to know that it's real. I agreed, kind of getting more and more excited at this time. As we start to step towards it, a crow must have broke out of a tree nearby and it really made us jump. All of my friends are laughing at me for being so scared, but I don't know, I felt extremely on edge in this situation and it's kind of like something I haven't felt before for a long time. Even working now as a ranger, I still haven't had that feeling. I think I was too on edge. I was too ready for something to happen. Now we go a little bit further ahead, and then I can see some kind of movement. It almost looks like there's a cat or something in one of the top windows moving round. It's all black, I can't see eyes, but I knew something was in there. I think maybe it's an animal. And we continue going forward. I don't know, I'm getting a really bad feeling about this, one of my friends says. But again, we say that we've come this far and that we need to figure out what this is. And so we press forward even more. Now eventually we get up to where the door was, and I, probably being the bravest at the time, decided to step in first. And this place smelled really weird. It was kind of like an old smell, one that I hadn't smelled before, and something smelled really bad in there. I didn't know what it was. I kept on and on searching for the source of the smell, but I really couldn't find anything. So that was something quite strange. I just expected either something to jump out at me constantly, or to see some kind of dead animal or thing there to make sense of the smell, but again, there's nothing. Now, I decided to go up the stairs to see what else is up there, and this place looks like it is from about the 1800s. There's no furniture or anything. There is a picture on the wall, but it's all faded off and you can't really see what it once was. I don't think it was a picture, but some kind of portrait, but it's gone now. I then see a big spider go up the wall, and I really don't like that. I'm looking for the cat though, and I can't find it. I think this is odd, so I continue my search. I was sure I saw something in here. Even if it wasn't a cat, I just had the urge to know exactly what it is and just figure out what was going on up here. Now, I end up going further ahead, and while my friends are down, I realise that there's an upstairs area. There are stairs that go up another level. I go up the stairs and I can see a suitcase. I don't see anything else there, and I decide that I'm going to open it up. I have to know what's in here. Even if it's bugs or something, I really want to know. As I go to open it, I hear a sound behind me. It's movement. I'm not bothered, I think that it's one of my friends, and I slowly turn around, and there I see it. A woman crouched in the corner, staring at me. I then realise this is a woman that I saw before, and she slowly smiles at me. I drop the suitcase down immediately. It startles me, but not her. One of my friends then joins me on the stairs and screams the second he sees a woman. Something about her didn't look real or human. The next thing I know, we're sprinting down those stairs. They felt impossibly long. It was almost like it had doubled in length. My other friends were also screaming now, and we all come flying out of the house, saying, "What was that? What on earth was that?" I say I don't know, and we start explaining to the others what we saw. One of my friends is constantly looking around, and he swears that he can see someone staring at us out of the window. We don't bother looking around. I mean, me and the guy who saw it, we just keep running. We were surprisingly fit, as we probably made it about 500 meters before slowing down again. We all stopped for a moment, now feeling safe that we're away from the house, saying, "What did we see?" No, none of us can agree on exactly what we saw. We keep looking around to where the house is, but weirdly we can't find it. I know that we run off and we're quite worried and disorientated, but we should be able to see the house, so it doesn't make sense why it's not there. I start to kind of lurch backwards a bit as I realise that the fear's really taken a toll on me. It's like my vision's gone a bit weird. We then start moving again. We start running as quick as we can, and we're trying desperately to locate our bikes. We eventually come back to the main path, but our bikes are nowhere to be found. Of course not, how could we possibly find it out here? How are we going to be able to differentiate it from the surroundings when everything looks the same? We didn't think of this at the time. I didn't even care about the bike. Now the thing that makes this suck is it's going to be a long journey back without the bikes, but we just can't find them. I do want to search for a bit longer, but my friends are all too scared, and we take off running again. We don't get too far as we're really tired now, and we have to start walking. What's worse is we've got about 2 hours of daylight now ahead of us. We're all discussing, running through the probabilities of what it was, and suddenly I get annoyed at the friend saying, "Why didn't you tell me that was there?" He says, "I can't know what's up there, I've never been in there before." We all look at him then, kind of annoyed, as if to say, "Well, why didn't you let us know that before?" He doesn't reply though. And eventually, we get to the part where we have to split ways. We all say goodbye to each other, and then watch my friends go off in different directions. I don't know why, I just felt the need to stop there for a second or so, just to try and figure out or at least make sense of what had happened, but I can't really make sense of anything. I then think, God, my bike, this isn't good, I'm going to be in so much trouble, and I start to fabricate an excuse to my mum as to what's happened to my bike, so at least then maybe she won't be too annoyed at me. It was stolen, that's it, I'm going to tell her it was stolen. Eventually, after a 2-hour walk, I get home just before the sunset. My mum can see me without my bike and says what happened, and it was stolen, Mum. I think a kid's stolen it. Weirdly, she wasn't annoyed at all. She said, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, honey. We'll get you another one. Dinner's ready." I'm really surprised, and I take my food and go and sit in my room to eat it. Now fast forward to all these years later, and even in my current line of work, I've never seen anything so strange, and I still can't really make sense of it all. I don't know what I could have possibly seen up there. I'm just glad that I wasn't the only person to have seen it, and somebody else did, because if it was just me, I probably wouldn't have believed it. About 20 years after I graduated high school, I used to run traps to make some extra money in the winter time. Since I was pregnant with my daughter, any sort of extra income was necessary, since trapping is frowned upon oddly. Anyway, my father had always told me about the creek I trapped in as being quite strange. We'd pretty much always walk the creek and collect arrowheads and look for other relics. So he would tell me stories about the Native American tribes there and their history and its folklore. It was a very special spot to us, so I began trapping, and my father would tell me to have respect for the wildlife, don't litter, kill inhumanely, and just don't kill unnecessarily. So I built a great deal of appreciation of life, which led to my career in conservation. The only reason I stated these things is to build context as to what I did. About once a week, while I was walking up the creek, I would hear whistling, like a human but in random patterns, and that would be with the smell of sulfur and rotten eggs, which my dad told me was mostly like a Bigfoot or skunk ape, and sightings had occurred as long as he could remember in our area. Then one time, I was scanning down the tree line with my binoculars to check to see if I had seen any coyotes or foxes in the traps. I see something weird, a fairly familiar medium-sized tree swaying back and forth. So I'm there with my .22 hoping to sneak up on a bobcat or any animal that was medium-sized that I can kill with a headshot. About 3/4 of the way to the tree line, the swaying stopped. I didn't see anything, but at least two of whatever it was began whistling and whooping further back in the forest. I continued to head up the creek, and it always stayed somewhat behind me at a distance but never left. That was fairly interesting. Then one day, sadly, an oil fracking company purchased the land. They still gave me permission to trap, but they had a few accidents where the water got so nasty that it killed everything. It broke my heart to see everything going down there. But after they had installed their rigs and cleared some of the forest, it seems to get hostile. One day running traps, I realised that all of my traps had been ruined, bent or broken, and the remaining animals I caught were either stolen, ripped from the trap, or not there. I was confused by this. Now, I found a coyote that was messed up so bad. Fur torn, broken lower jaw, and head beaten. I felt like this was in retaliation to what the oil company had done, and I was being blamed as weird. But it is positive. A few months afterwards, I would go to the store twice a week to buy a variety of apples, pears, a mixture of meat from carcasses I'd skinned. I put them in a basket and leave it in the forest, hoping whatever it was would get it before anything else. Sometimes the basket would disappear, but always in 2 days, everything was gone. One day, I believe it was leaving me a present in return. When I returned where I dropped off the basket, there was about 100 plus small sticks very neatly laid across the floor, and a deer antler and 20 acorns. I do hope that I did help this creature, though it might have been a Bigfoot or something. I don't know. I never physically seen it, but it was definitely weird because the area was so isolated. Still to this day, 20 years later, I think of it time to time, and I don't see a reasonable person being there. For some background, I live in California, in a major metropolitan area, no forested area or anything like that. My neighborhood is behind a fairly sketchy strip mall, the ones where most of the shops are always closed or boarded up, and the ones that are open are fronts for something. So one evening, I was coming home late from work, about 11 or so. As I was turning into my neighborhood past the woods, I noticed that one of the strip mall lights is on. Now this caught my eye, but instantly drew my attention, as I now realized that something was walking up the ramp to the front door. It was short, barely the height of the row, walked with incredibly stiff legs that didn't bend at all. It had very long arms, almost down to the knees. Unfortunately, it was all in shadow as the light was behind it, so I have no idea of the colour or anything. It gave me the creepiest feeling. If I'm outside at night, I still think about it, even months later. I'm only familiar with the common types of cryptids, or whatever you call it, so I was wondering what it could have possibly been. I'm just hoping somehow it was a person, but I don't think that's possible. This happened many years ago. I lived in Maryland, a little suburb type community. My bedroom faces the road and my parents face the backyard. We lived in the middle of a cul-de-sac, so you can see a lot from my bedroom window. One night, late in the evening, I got up to use the bathroom. When I got back to bed, I heard knocking at my bedroom window. I was on the second floor, so I knew nobody should be out there. I thought it was my cat, so I rolled over and tried and sleep. Though there's more knocking, only this time there was a pattern to it, like shave and a haircut. So this is definitely not my cat now. It was from outside. My door was on the side of the room, so it wasn't anybody in there. I got out of bed and went over to my window to look outside. At the end of the street was a light post and a giant oak tree next to it. This little creature, looking like a real-life version of Danny DeVito's penguin, but not so dirty, was dancing underneath the light post. It grabbed the pole when it realized I was looking at it, and spun around and jumped to the side and disappeared. It was so weird. I have no idea what it was, and I've never seen it since. I'm going to try and give as many details as possible. I live in Ohio, around Youngstown, and my family owns a cabin in PA near the Albuquerque forest. It's my grandpa's cabin. He's a retired firefighter, and years ago, he and his firefighter friends would go hunting in the forest. His friends stayed in a tree while the rest were sprayed out amongst the property in various stands. Around lunchtime, they planned to meet up and eat. Calling the friend, he wouldn't answer for anyone or reply on walkie-talkie. They decided to go and check up on him, and they found him petrified, ducking down in the tree stand. They said the trees looked like they had been snapped around with ease. He's as white as a ghost. He claimed that a large, estimated 8 feet tall humanoid creature that stunk so bad had been tearing down trees left, right, and centre around the stand. So tall his head almost touched where he is. He had no idea what it was. With all his years of hunting, he's never seen anything like it. He didn't know what to think of it. This story took place in the late 90s/2000s. My dad was in the Navy, and at the time of the story, he was on leave while visiting home. This incident took place in rural Pennsylvania in a national forest. I don't know if this had any significance, but our town has a huge native history with a reservation just north of us. My dad was seeing an old friend from high school, and they were driving along one of the very empty roads surrounded by woods or in a forested area. The road was dug in a giant and very steep hill, covered in huge towering evergreen trees. As they were driving, suddenly a small black figure launches 40 feet from the upslant of the hillside and lands on the pavement in front of the car. They hadn't stopped yet. Now they're just about to hit this figure's dead corpse until, right as they're about to hit it, it springs off and jumps over the guardrail down the hillside. Apparently they both saw it, but they both sat in silence, not wanting to look crazy, until my dad's friend said, "God, what was that? Was that a monkey?" He said, "I don't know, I thought I'd seeing things." My dad said that it appeared to be like a chimp, except its fur was longer and rattier. It hung down from its arms, and it was matted and wet. He didn't get much of a glimpse though, really. A few years later, my dad then found out about something called a skunk ape, which he maintains to this day is what he saw. I've been in a long distance relationship with my girlfriend for a couple of years, and every summer and winter break I'm able to go and travel and see her. This encounter happened 2 years ago at my girlfriend's house. I should mention that my girlfriend lives on the outskirts of her city in Mexico, where houses are around 200 to 300 yards apart and surrounded by dense woods. Usually, days and nights go by peacefully, accompanied by the sound of the woods and the occasional car passing by from others who live nearby. I had always considered her place to be perfect to spend time outdoors until this occasion. Honestly, I don't think I've ever been so scared in my life. The sighting will forever be a part of my mind. On a chilly night of December, I was at my girlfriend's house. I had planned to spend the night with her since she would have been there herself that day. Her mum was out of town and she didn't want to stay there by herself either. We were having dinner in the kitchen at around 8 p.m. We chatted about activities and could do tomorrow. Then tasked her mum and asked her what to do, how much we both missed each other, among others. After about an hour of conversation and laughs, we decided to go into the living room to watch some TV. We get up and do the dishes. She went into the bedroom and I went outside to the bathroom. The house layout consists of a long corridor that connected pretty much every room in the house and a back door at the end of a corridor which led to the patio. The patio was open, full of trees, plants, and the only thing separating the patio from the woods is a fence made up of stones and barbed wire that stood about 1 meter tall. Halfway down the patio, there was the bathroom, being lit by a single weak light bulb, so if anybody wanted to go, they had to walk outside, even if it had to be in the middle of the night. I'm not coming here, I thought. I remembered when I opened the back door and stepped into the patio, a cold breeze struck my face and sent shivers across my back, so I hurried back as quickly as possible, but to be honest, I was a little spooked going out into the darkness, knowing that the woods were pretty much only a few steps away, So I finished doing my business and washed my hands and walked back, being careful not to trip on something because the light bulb was almost non-existent. I was about halfway there when I heard a noise to my left, like somebody stepped on a branch and broke it. I stopped and quickly turned, trying to see what made the sound, but I could only see a proportion of the fence and nothing but darkness beyond that. However, I have a feeling that I'm being watched, like something was surrounding me. I stood there in silence for about 30 seconds. I listened to the surroundings, only to notice the crickets had stopped chirping. I get outside even further now, but I'm still freaked out because I don't know why I can't hear much now. I was somewhat scared to move, but did it anyways, almost running to get back inside as quick as possible. When I returned, I went to my girlfriend who's in the living room, laying down on the couch with a blanket. She noticed I was a bit agitated and says, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Your patio's scary." I said it jokingly though, not wanting to scare her, because she hates anything horror related. I decided to brush it off, so I went around to the couch and sat at the other end of it, putting my girlfriend's legs on my lap, and asked her what she was watching on TV. I turned to my right and noticed that there was a huge window on one side of the wall that gave me a perfect view of the patio. I didn't see it before because it was next to a cabinet being covered on the way to the living room. Now I knew about it. I kept turning to see outside, still thinking how scary it looks. We start watching a pretty boring documentary. I was getting sleepy, but after around 20 minutes I begin to hear noises. Now I noticed that they seem to be coming from the patio. I grab the controller and make the TV quiet, making sure that I'm hearing the correct thing, and I was. It sounded like tiny twigs breaking and grass being brushed. I quickly turned to my right to see outside the window, but I could only see the plants and part of a tree trunk from a tree. The noise, although faint, stopped for a few seconds, assuming a few moments later and then stopping again. I stood frozen watching outside my window, almost as if I was waiting for a thing to appear. "What is that noise?" I whispered to my girlfriend, but after I didn't get a reply, I turned around and stood up a little to see her eyes are closed and she's asleep. I was a bit freaked out, but I chose to believe it's a coyote or one of those animals that lurks at night. I keep watching the TV, though muted, waiting to hear the sounds again, but after a while it had stopped, I realised. I turned around one more time to see outside the window and felt my heart sink to my stomach. The first thing I noticed when I looked outside that time was a faint image of a pale grey, tall humanoid creature peeking from outside of the big tree trunk, staring back at me. Suddenly I froze in fear, not wanting to even slightly move or breathe. I watched this thing watching me, even though I couldn't see its eyes because of the poor lighting. But I knew it was watching me. I knew it was aware of me. I somehow felt it. The creature was, like I said, pale, really pale. I could see the contrast between its skin and the bark of the tree. The creature's really thin, had really skinny shoulders and a torso to match, as well as an elongated neck. It was maybe 6 or 7 feet tall. Unfortunately, or I should say fortunately, I couldn't distinguish too much details of its face or whatnot because of the darkness, but I could perfectly picture in my head how the shadowy areas around where the eyes are were definitely appearing really weird, and it had a huge hole for where its mouth should be, and it seems to be grinning, which is really, really odd. Now, at this point, I was trembling a little. I wanted to let my girlfriend know what I was witnessing, but I didn't want to even move a muscle or break eye contact with that thing. It felt like I needed to remain still or play dead to loosen its attention, but no, it's still staring at me, not moving an inch, like it was trying to do the same. Then, to turn things around and make it even worse for me, the creature started to make a clicking sound which echoed, kind of like a frog but slower. I then noticed that it begins to turn its head to the side and turn back to look at me really quick. I didn't know what to think anymore. All I wanted was my girlfriend to wake up and prove to me that the thing was real. I begin whispering her name in between my teeth and mouth. I don't even want to move my jaw, but she doesn't wake up. The thing kept doing the same, turning its head left and to the right really quick now. The creature was kind of like when the big predator cat saw hunting and they lay low preparing to attack. What the heck? I whisper. I know, stupid. I didn't think through what I was doing. But I didn't think through what if I woke up my girlfriend. She starts moving and that thing notices both of us, but I was so scared. This thing went around for maybe less than 15 minutes before I realised that I still had my girlfriend's foot in my hand in the blanket, so the thing would not be able to see me moving. Only using my wrist, I slightly pulled her leg back and forth, whispering her name, but no response. Then, I stood in shock while I saw the creature stand up again, walking backwards, still looking at me, and then disappearing into the darkness of the patio with the clicking sounds. I pulled saliva and blinked a few times, realizing my eye itched from staring at it for so long. For some reason, I couldn't turn my head around. I was fixated on the area that the creature had come from. Now, a few minutes passed, very slowly, almost like in slow motion. I turned to try and wake up my girlfriend again. Her foot jerked and she starts turning. I stood up to her shoulders and patted her, whispering, "Hey, wake up." She opened her eyes and squinted at me, adjusting to the TV light, wondering why I woke her up. I kept telling her to remain silent and still when I heard the sounds again. She looked at me and notices a concern in my eyes, saying, "What's wrong?" I tell her be quiet. Then I put 2 fingers on her lips, again trying to make her be quiet. I could see she was scared and I don't blame her. I would be too if somebody woke me up like that and I didn't know what was happening. The clicking went off again, but it was louder this time, almost as if that thing was on the other side of the window. This time, both of us heard the noise and we looked at each other in silence. My girlfriend asked me again what was happening, but almost in slow motion, I slowly turned my head to the window to check, and there it was. The thing was right outside the window, only a couple of feet away, staring right back at me. This time, I had a clearer version of it now. But I was petrified, and I noticed that it doesn't actually have a mouth where a person should. Instead, it's on its neck, which opened horizontally, not vertically. And its mouth opened and vibrated, making the clicking sound, and I can see many small razor-like teeth. It had oval-shaped eyes which were as dark as the night. I felt its gaze pierce my soul. I started shaking and breathing faster, not believing what I'm seeing. My girlfriend peeked by my side to see what I was looking at, and I instantly felt her body tense up as she started to ask me in a terrible voice, "What's that?" But no answer ever come out of me. Now we're both scared, not even moving a muscle. After the humanoid notices my girlfriend move, it gave a step forward and lowered its head, almost as though scanning us. We actually both jumped in fear after seeing it doing this. My heart is pounding so fast, I think I'm actually gonna faint. And then, this weird thing starts slowly turning to its right side, in the direction where the door is in the corridor, resuming the sounds. If you have seen the movie Signs and remember the scene where the humanoid came out of the bushes into the house, this would have been an accurate representation of what we saw. We took a good look at every inch of this thing's body. It then starts turning towards us. We then lost sight of it through the window. We both sat up and look at each other suddenly. We hear scratching on the metal door that leads to the corridor, as if this thing was trying to get through. Without thinking twice, I grabbed my girlfriend's wrist and bolted out of the living room. We locked ourselves in the bedroom. We sat on the floor right next to the bedroom, hiding in case that thing got inside. The scratching sounds continued and my girlfriend starts to cry, asking, did we see the same thing? I felt powerless knowing I couldn't do much to try and reassure her. I could only hold her and hope that this thing gave up and left. The noises continued for about 3 minutes before it suddenly stops. Then we hear footsteps and noises all around the house, so we kept turning, not sure what to do. Eventually the sounds stop. After about an hour, we figured this thing left. My girlfriend, still in tears, told me we could lay in bed. I agreed because my back was hurting from that crouching position. We slowly crawl into bed, making the least possible sound, and covering ourselves with another blanket. I tell her not to worry. I tightened my grip around her. She didn't reply, but after a while she fell asleep. I didn't get a minute of sleep that night though. I kept my eyes open, listening for sounds around us. The next day, we didn't even want to touch the subject. All we said is that that creature is not from this world. My girlfriend said that she felt that creature pierce into her soul. Now, nothing else was said and we were really traumatized. I realized that she was going to have to put up with that fear whenever going out in the future or in the woods or something. Days after the encounter, we both suffered from nightmares. She mentioned that sometimes she woke up in the middle of the night screaming and trembling. The fences that separated the patio actually had been redone since, and they now stand about 2 meters tall, blocking easy access from the woods. I've since kept wondering what that thing was. Was it a humanoid? Was it some kind of cryptid, or maybe an alien? Now the following is a series of weird things that happened to me that I truly can't explain. Now what annoys me most about this is that I've tried to tell people my experience and they kind of just laugh it off. Actually, I told one of my colleagues at work today. I work as a Forest Server fire patrol person, but when I told them my story, they kind of just laughed at me and said, "Oh yeah, is that really what happened?" And that really annoys me. And this is supposed to be someone that's quite similar and that I'd actually consider a friend there, and also had weird experiences before, so I just don't get it. People are so eager to hear what you say, but then they're so happy and quick to dismiss everything. I just don't get it. But let's dive into my story and hopefully at least a few of you will understand. Now, emotionally, I wasn't really the same after this. I don't know why. I'm not a spiritual person and I don't really believe in religion much, but this kind of made me think about what else is really out there. Where I live, there can be lots of snow all the time, but I love to go on my little adventures, and there was a forest that was supposedly haunted near where I lived. Now I'd heard quite a few things about this place, and apparently you'll hear screams in the night. You'll see headless people wandering around, and I guess just the works really. Now I'd actually been here on 2 occasions before. One was when I drove out with one of my friends, but to be honest, it was just the biggest waste of time. I mean, literally nothing happened. We were driving for a long time to get there, and basically nothing happened and we just get bored and come back. So I wasn't expecting too much in the second time that I'd been there. Again, nothing had happened, but in more recent times, I'd moved much closer and thought, why not go? Also, there was quite a nice snowfall, so I thought this was pretty cool. I really like going on adventures at night time like this, especially when the elements are involved. For whatever reason, it kind of makes me feel almost like I'm in a movie, especially if I've got my AirPods with me and I just listen to songs, and it really creates a vibe. I always found it empowering, but yeah. So I set out at night and I walked towards the forest off of the main path, and it's really dark. The stars are looking absolutely beautiful above me, and luckily there's no cars coming, so I just get off and straight into where the forest starts. There was probably about 30 meters of snow or whatnot before it actually starts. Then you're hit by lots of trees. Now I turn my flashlight on and suddenly I can see really well. I had a really powerful one that was actually adapted for cameras and stuff. I was actually joking with one of my friends, it's like turning on the daytime and there's nothing to be scared of. And I also said that this probably scares away the spirits more than anything. They probably think it's God. I think of these jokes as I can see my breath in front of me from the cold. Now, it's kind of like the snow that's fallen quite quickly to the ground, almost like it's kind of sleet, but it's not. It's still snowing. I notice it as I take my first steps into the forest. I have some pretty skinny trees on either side of me when I see something that looks odd. I can see what appears to be a white silhouette to my left when suddenly it vanishes. I'm a little confused by this, but suddenly I realise that it must be my breath from where I've got my scarf and things. I think it's a little odd and I tell myself just to relax a bit and I keep walking. The trees are kind of like overarching here and it actually looks really beautiful. I do notice one odd thing. There seems to be footprints that lead off from the main trail, but they kind of look like hoof shapes. I thought maybe some kind of animal went through here, or God knows what. It couldn't have been horse riding because the branches are actually too low. To give you an idea, they're probably about 8 feet above me or dropping down to 5, so you'd have to duck sometimes. Now these aren't nice branches too. They're the kinds that come snagged on each other, and if you make one loose, it's going to kind of whip you in the face. And I didn't want to lose my eyes. But it wasn't too much of an issue, really. So when I set off, I didn't really have a direction or place that I wanted to go to. I heard there was an old church that used to be here, and I thought, you know what, that would be pretty cool if I can find that. Who knows what would happen if I go there on my own. Now at the time, I was certain no other people around because I literally can't hear anything or see anyone. A really good telling sign is the fact that there's no lights. You kind of need lights to see where you're going out here, but I literally couldn't see any. Every so often, I look off into the woods and I don't see anything. I did notice one or two strange sounds, but they didn't happen too frequently. I know that there's lots of animals out here because of my normal line of work, and just I guess from having some good sense about my surroundings, so I didn't let it put me off. I knew I had to be careful of certain animals out here because I guess some could hunt at night, but I was going to be far bigger and they wouldn't dare go to me. The sky almost looks like a beautiful orangey colour above me because of my torch, and I think that's really pretty. I do start to feel the cold a bit now, so decide to pick up the pace. Another interesting thing is there's lots and lots of footprints on this path which have been here earlier. And I think that's a little bit bizarre because usually people don't hum here too often. I'm very used to going out here and there's no one around. So that was interesting. As I'm walking, the snow's now going directly into my face and it actually made it a bit annoying, to be honest. I stopped for a moment to try and figure out the direction of it so I can try and avoid it when I hear a howling off. Now I don't know exactly where it's coming from, but there seems to be another little trail where you can cut through going off of the main path, but I decide not to follow it just in case. I was kind of expecting to run into some crazy dog walker or something, but they never showed up, so I think this is a little bit odd. Eventually I come up to one of the trail signs and I can see some of the wildlife that lives here, and I think to myself, well, there's definitely nothing that's going to hunt me, as it's just birds and things like that. But I do wonder what the sound is that I heard. Now, I go a little bit further along and eventually the snow picks up even more now. It felt a little bit different and almost like the weather had become more hostile now. Again, I'm not a spiritual person, but it almost started to feel a bit more like the air was different here. Now, the only way I can describe what I was seeing if you haven't been in the woods at night in the snow is everything sort of looks like an infinite dream. It's almost like somebody's made an unlimited map of just forest, snow, woods, and it's just going to keep on going forever. You do have to be careful out here though, because if you really go off the path, then you don't want to be stuck out in the cold like this. As you can imagine, trying to get a fire going is not easy at the best of times, let alone here. As I'm thinking of this, I hear sounds up above again. I can hear somebody scurrying through the tree line. Well, at least that's what I think it is. And I pause for a second, and I go to switch my flashlight with one that has more of a focus beam. And I kid you not, as this is happening, I can see what appears to be a really small kind of lanky armed person scurrying through the woods. And I take a moment to figure out what this is. I quickly flicker on my other light, which is more powerful, and I don't see anything, so I just put it down to my mind going a little bit loose. I do have to say, I've never seen anything like this, and I think this is really weird. Annoyingly, my eyes didn't adjust well enough in the darkness to actually see this thing, and I have tried telling this part to some other people, but again, they all just say, oh yeah, it's just a rabbit. But I mean, come on, I've seen rabbits, and this thing had lanky arms. I can only describe it as if a person was about 3 feet tall, had a very large torso, and very long skinny arms that dragged the floor. But I don't know where they've gone. I tried looking around for more footprints, but I can't see anything, and this gives me a little bit of adrenaline to pick up the pace. I knew I'd gone out here hoping to find some ghosts and things, but now I wasn't so sure if I actually wanted to find them or not. Now again, I can see a mist form just in front of me, then slowly disappear again. It was a white mist, and it's really like somebody's just breathed in front of me and then vanished. I try and replicate how I was standing a few moments ago and pace backwards and start breathing more heavily to see if it was me, but there's nothing there. Pretty confused at this point, but I decided to just pick up the pace more. Now, I had one other scary experience before from being out in the woods I can think of now, but this was more to do with an animal than anything supernatural. I remember I'd gone somewhere and a big old moose appeared and it was extremely close to me. For whatever reason, it didn't really take notice of me, it just looked at me for a second, but I remember that scared me. But that feeling that I had was kind of beginning to loom over me, and I started to wonder if maybe there was a large animal like that around. Now this is when I noticed the first strange structure. It's something that I hadn't realised before. It's a large wooden structure that looks like 3 trees, kind of in a Stonehenge shape, but a little bit less spread out. This is really weird. It's like they've been carved by hand and placed upright. And what was really bizarre is that there isn't much snow in the middle. It seems like the ground is staying particularly dry here, and not snow forming. Now, I think this is really bizarre because, well, where I am there shouldn't be anything like this. I would have been aware of it too, and I don't understand why I'd never noticed it before. It now becomes apparent that I'm not actually on the main path. I switch off my flashlight once more, and I just take a few seconds to take in everything. I'm trying to give my eyes some time to adjust to the darkness, and I look down at my battery. It's dropped down to 40% on the main flashlight thing, and that's a bit of a worry. Batteries drain pretty quick in the cold, and now I notice that there's more of the mist forming up ahead of me. I actually take a second just to assess what this actually is, but I can't figure out what it is. It's almost like a group of people standing there, kind of just like breathing or talking normally, but there's no one around, and it only seems to be spawning in a specific spot. Now, I once more get closer and try and figure out what this is, but I just can't. Now, it reminds me of a story of what one of my other Fire Ranger friends had told me about. Sorry to go off topic, but I think it's important because it might have been linked to what I saw. Now, one of my good friends had been working in the service for quite a number of years, and he would always try and prank us and pretend there was scary things out there. We never believed him, and sometimes he would actually get us with Halloween masks and stuff, and that was pretty creepy. But I remember one day that he come up to us and he looked very freaked out. He said, "Guys, I saw something and I don't know what it is." We ask him to elaborate and he refuses for a while, but because I'm good friends with him, eventually he decides to tell me what he saw. Apparently, he thought he saw a fire, so he went over to investigate it. Apparently it was just a small red cherry glow, but that could be the start of something. Just as he got to where it was, it suddenly went out, and there was a very big mist that appeared, which is like a smoky white colour. It almost looked like there was a huge fire in terms of the amount of smoke, but nothing was burning. He said it stayed here for literally 3 or 4 minutes as he stared at this bewildered, until eventually it just vanishes. Now the reason that I'm telling you this is because it was incredibly similar to what I saw in terms of how he described it, the way that it moved, the slight opaqueness of it, everything was just weird. I stood there for what must have been about a good 4 minutes before eventually I decided that, yeah, I'm probably gonna have to press through this now. I couldn't be waiting around here all day, and I decided to be brave and walk through it. I actually held my breath just before I did so because I didn't know if it was maybe some kind of dangerous chemical or something that had leaked out, but there wasn't anything. I eventually make it through after what felt like ages, to be honest, and I was actually gasping for breath. It probably took me a good 20 seconds to get through this. Eventually when I do, I turn around to try and figure out where it had gone, and I can't see it. I do think that I can see something just moving off into the distance, but I can't be sure. It was almost like a group of people had vanished, but one of them had just went off into the woods. Now, I'm a little bit freaked out, but again, I was here alone, so there's not really too much I can think of this. Now, I do notice something else very weird. There seems to be lots of really bizarre shaped footprints going off in different directions. They're all kind of like the hoof shaped, like the thing I'd seen earlier, but they're really far spread apart, like something quite tall had been walking. But it's walking as though that it's in complete arrogance to the trees that are there, like they don't exist. And again, I don't know what kind of animal could have done this. Now I walk on. I haven't really got a direction this time. I just know that I need to keep going. I have a feeling that I'm in a bad spot, and that's when I see something. This time I was certain that I was seeing something that was actually there. It was very far away, but I can only describe this as something which is completely black, with these white tusk arm things that was about 4 feet tall that hops around. I only saw this for a couple of seconds and it vanishes, but it's probably the scariest part of the encounter for me. I don't want to describe it as like a demonic thing because again, I'm not spiritual, but I don't really know what this was. It's like a really weird creature that would stand awkwardly and almost like it was just bent out too far and shouldn't be balanced, but it was. I flash on both the lights at the same time searching for it, but again, I don't see anything. I then realise that I'm not too far from a lake that I'm actually familiar with, and that's when I noticed a strange glow coming from the other side of it. Now, it was kind of like a glow of like a power plant would give, I guess, in the horizon. Almost like heat waves of light just emanating out slowly, again in the white colour, but almost having more of an energy to it. I decide that I have to investigate. Now, I was actually stupidly close to the shoreline now, because one slip, one twisted ankle and I could go through the ice and no one would get me here. I'd die of hypothermia before rescuers could find me, but the sense of adventure had taken over. I turn my light around again, and I can't see anything. For a second, I'm sure I can make out the faint glow of 2 eyes, but I don't know if this is just an animal, so I'm not too worried. There's also strange sounds coming from over where that the light is, and It's almost like lots of people talking played backwards, really far off, really far, like barely audible, but I could hear it. The forest was pretty quiet at this time, and I think it made it worse. I'm constantly flashing around with my lights, trying to just get whatever this is to show up more, but I can't see anything. Now, I know some people are asking me why wasn't I more scared of that weird thing I'd seen, and to be honest, I can't tell you that. It was almost like I was drawn into something, and a mixed personality had taken over where I was seeing weird things and they weren't welcoming, but they weren't worrying for whatever reason, like I had to go on further. I decided that I need to keep up my pace now, but I have some pretty good thoughts and I think, well, I don't want to fall in the water and die, so I go off now. At this part, the trees are a lot thicker than before, and that was a bit more reassuring. But that lake, I'm constantly hearing sounds from over where that lake is, and I just cannot for the life of me figure out what they are. I actually can't remember the sounds too well, and I don't know if it was because I was in a bit of a heightened state during the experience, but I just remembered they were weird sounds, like scratching and things like that. Now I know it could have easily been a group of people on drugs or God knows what, but given the weather conditions, I think that's extremely unlikely. Again, this is something one of my incredible colleagues told me that that's what this could have been, and joking that it was green men and aliens, but I don't understand it, because again, these people are so interested to hear what I was saying, and maybe they're denying it because they're scared of what I'm telling them, or just refuse to believe it, but that annoyed me. And I've always been somebody who has the ability to break down the physics of things. If something has happened, I don't immediately go to the irrational explanation. I think with a scientific mind, but it failed me this day, because I can't come up with much for what was happening to me. Now I continue on as the snow gets a little bit thicker now. I think the reason for this might have been because there weren't as many thin trees blocking out all of the snow to capture it, just quite a few big ones with more space in between, but it did actually make my legs hurt. I noticed my knees are quite cold, so my remedy for this is once again to pick up the pace. I clear some of the snow that's actually settled on me, and I actually feel a bit better now. There's quite a big drop off down to the lake now, and I realise that I'm going uphill. What was weird though is that I haven't been to this area before, and I can't really find it. Even since I've been back to the forest again, I've never been able to find this exact spot. Now, it was like somebody had described the area that I was in to somebody else, and they'd tried to make it but not done it exactly the same, and you kind of know deep down that you're not in exactly the same place, but there's enough familiarity for you to feel confident in the situation. Now, as I get closer to the light that I could see, I realise that this definitely isn't the moonlight, because it was kind of flickering like it had an electrical energy to it, and was kind of flashing around into the clouds a little bit, not like lightning, but kind of like the northern lights, and that was what I find really bizarre. Just the whole energy of whatever this was is like nothing that I've ever seen before. A little bit scared now, I start to slowly pan around trying to see anything, but I can't find a thing. Every so often I hear sounds of movement behind me, but I can't be sure what this is. I decide that I just need to keep it moving, and that was one of the things that made me feel more safe in this situation now. I eventually come up onto the bend and I start approaching towards where the light is directly now. Now again, I'm not too scared or shy of adventures, so I have to keep pressing forward one step at a time. I do notice something odd, and that's that there aren't any steps up here. I know people might not have gone here in the daytime, but it does seem weird because there was just so many earlier that I'd seen pretty much everywhere. The snow had actually slowed down a little bit and it wasn't as abrasive on my face, and this was quite nice. My nose and toes always seemed to suffer, especially in the cold, along with my hands. I think I have a problem where they don't have very good blood or they just seem to switch off in the cold, but it made the going a little bit tough and less comfortable. Now, had I found the ghost that I was looking for? Not just yet. So I decide that I need to go towards the light. But again, the way that the light is kind of bouncing off the clouds, almost like it's the northern lights, was just really strange. I was incredibly drawn into this, almost like I was looking at a hypnotist's watch. It was incredibly beautiful, but just really weird. I didn't know if it was related to an electrical storm, but it wouldn't really make sense for me. I have seen something bizarre while working on the service, so again, a little bit similar to this. I remembered one time that I was working. I was actually in the station and I just made myself a coffee. I went to step outside and had a look around at the sky at night just because it's so beautiful, and I do notice something odd. There's almost like a large blue electrical ball of light in the sky. It's opaque and not really visible, and it only lasted for a few seconds, but it's like nothing I've ever seen before. A few of my colleagues had actually reported seeing it as well while on duty at the exact same time that I did, and this kind of had the same characteristics, but it wasn't identical. But I want to find out what this is, and I wasn't as scared as I was before. Now, the closer I get, there's something else I notice which is pretty bizarre, and that's that the sky seems to be kind of imitating this very loosely. It's almost like somebody turned on a pulse of electricity through the clouds above me. It's almost like the northern lights are above the whole sky now, but extremely faint, but the same colour as the clouds, so again, it's almost like they were pulsating a bit. I did get scared because there's the eye condition that someone in my family has, which is actually a little bit similar to this, but I've been tested for it multiple times since and after this event, and it's always come up clear. But in the moment, I was pretty scared because I really worry about having issues with my vision. Now, luckily it turned out it wasn't my eyes, and I quickly did some tests by looking at the ground and things that weren't moving to realise that nothing was off. But why was the sky moving? I wasn't so sure what was happening, but I wasn't that far away now from where I needed to be. That's when I noticed another wooden structure. It's similar to what I've seen before, but it kind of formed more of a hexagon type of shape. Every so often I would see these on either sides of the trail, and they seemed to be increasing in frequency as I got closer to the light. I only saw about 3 more of them, but again, never seen it since. I stop for a moment, and I can see my breath on my light as I take my mask down just to try and get a better feel of what was happening. I shine the torch around, but again, I don't see much of anything. Don't know what I was expecting to see. I've just got the glow dead ahead of me now, and I know I have to get there. It's not much longer now before I'm there, so at least I've got that to look forward to, and I can eventually start heading back. I'm not sure how far I'd actually come at this point, but I've probably been walking for about a good 50 or 60 minutes. It doesn't sound like much, but usually you'll feel it more than I was in this situation, because walking in the snow is actually really difficult sometimes, and the cold can kind of zap out all of your energy. Now, I'm not too far away from where this is, and I can hear the voices again. It sounds like whispering. I can make out the odd word or two, but nothing seems to be in a language that I understand. It's definitely in a language though, and it hasn't increased in volume or anything since when I first heard it earlier. I don't know if it was there the whole time because I kind of just zoned out to it, but I suddenly noticed it much more than I had done earlier. And again, this is pretty weird to me because, like I said, I've never heard anything like it, and it is a bit creepy. Now, I eventually come up to the last clearing where the light should be, and I'm quite excited to get here. There seems to be lots of footsteps here everywhere, so I'm pretty convinced that I've made it back onto the main path now. I've got a good feeling now, and I know that there must be somebody there, so I feel pretty happy. So, what do? Take my steps around it. I can definitely hear the voices on the right side of me now, and I keep stopping every couple of seconds to approximate exactly where it is. Every so often I see movement up ahead of me, and I'm convinced that it's people out here now, so I feel much more relaxed and reassured. I'm now going down the last straight part that I have to go to, with the trees kind of forming an arch above me, and the snow still everywhere around me. Now some people have asked me why did I keep going and what was I actually doing out there. That was my friends at work earlier, and I don't know. I guess it kind of felt like I'd been there for too long and I was at least going to get something out of it, and yeah. So I continue up and I eventually find where the clearing is, and I realise that I've only got about another 20 feet of a walk to figure out what this is, and I can see movement again. I decide that the best thing to do in this situation is just to slowly sneak up on who or whatever it is up ahead of me. Now yes, I've got them, I think. I can see some more lights ahead too. I'd see 2, then 3, then they go out. I don't have my light on at this point because I want the element of surprise. The snow is coming against me, but not directly in my face, so this is pretty pleasant. Now, I come up to where I can hear the voices finally getting louder and louder, and my excitement is growing. It feels like I've been here for too long trying to figure out what is actually going on, and I'm gonna get my taste of it soon. I am kind of looking over my shoulder every so often though, because I do hear sounds like I'm being followed. Again, I keep thinking I'm seeing movement, but there's not much of anything when I focus, so I try not to think of it. I don't actually have my torch on now, so I can't verify the fact that there's nothing there. But again, I just presumed it was people. And I thought, well, they haven't said anything to me, and I'm not disturbing them, so why are they going to be annoyed at me? It was almost like an overconfidence, and eventually, I come up to the tree line and the clearing. I start going a lot slower now as I get closer and closer to where I can hear them all. Now the chanting is still illegible, and I take my first step up, and I look around and I can see what must be hundreds of people all standing around the edge of some kind of clearing. They've all got their hands raised up and they're making some weird chanting sound. Now they're not actually that close to me, so it's pretty difficult to make out how tall they are, but these things seem really small. I say things because I don't know if they were people unless they were on their knees, but that's what it looked like. I start to shake a little bit as I feel a lot more like I'm in danger now. I decide that I'm gonna slowly turn my flashlight on for a second and figure out what this actually is. My eyes adjust more and more to the darkness every couple of seconds, and I notice something wrong. They don't look like normal people. The shape of them's all wrong and their arms are too long, and they're all either wearing some white things on their arms, but it looks very pointy, just like the things I'd seen earlier. I try as best I can to slowly flicker on the torch, but I cannot do it. Again, I start shaking more and more and try and press it, but nothing happens. I keep on and on flicking until eventually it flashes on, and for a split second I can see these things. They're like very dark small creatures with weird pointy arms, all facing up to the sky making some weird sounds. Their mouths are what really scare me. It's like just a circle with lots of jagged teeth. And just as I'm taking this all in, they suddenly vanish, and so does the sounds. I quickly fire the torch around everywhere trying to see where they've gone, but I can't see anything. I can hear my heartbeat in my ears like a constant rhythmic drum. And then, a few moments later, I hear movement, rustling and the sounds as though hundreds of people are all coming towards me suddenly, and I take off. I turn my torch on and quickly dart up ahead of myself, constantly looking over my shoulder with the torch. What I have just seen, I don't know, but I knew that I was in danger and had to get out of there. Luckily, I can retrace my footprints for most of the journey until I get away from the clearing. I can hear the sounds are still coming after me, just much slower than me, but they're still coming. I stop for a second and fire the torch around everywhere but can't see anything, and I drop it. Now, I managed to drop it not only into the snow, but face first, and that also means there's no light illuminating back at me, it's kind of buried. Just as I say to myself, you've got to be kidding me, I can hear something else not far up ahead of me. So I take off. Thank God I actually brought the other torch with me, because I'm absolutely certain at the fact that I would have had cardiac arrest otherwise. Now, the only problem I've got is the other torch isn't that easily accessible right now. I put it away when I was trying to hide and be not heard, but now I'm starting to think that wasn't really a good idea. And because I've had this on and so close to my face, I haven't really adjusted to the dark, and I don't know where I'm going. I used to be quite good at long distance cross country, so I have that in my favour. But I soon realise those years are way behind me, and I come up to a point where there's two paths. One's much smaller and seems untrodden but should be closer to where I need to get to. The other is what seems to be closer to where the light is, and I have to choose the latter. Now I take off down this path, and I keep fumbling trying to get the other torch on, but for whatever reason I just can't seem to do it. I don't know if it was for the fact that it was in the cold for too long, but in those moments it just would not come back to life again, and I'm just hitting it on my palm constantly. Now it's extremely difficult to navigate in this moment. I think I know where I'm going, but I can't really tell. There's clearly lots and lots of different footprints on this path, and I can't tell if they're normal or not because I was rushing so much, but it gives me some reassurance that I must be going in a relatively good direction to escape whatever this is. Now I should mention at this point that the sounds are long gone. I'd absolutely blitzed something that seemed like it couldn't go much quicker than a light walking pace, but it didn't matter. I don't know what was chasing me or why. I don't know what I'd just disturbed. Eventually, I flick my torch on again, and I illuminate the rest of the way back. I turn it off again quickly because I'm not sure how good the battery is and I really needed to conserve it. I stop for a few moments to collect my breath and look around me, and I think I know my bearings now, and I start to walk. The only reason that I had to walk now is because I was so out of breath and exhausted from moving in the snow that I genuinely was going to have to crawl the rest of the way out otherwise. I now make it up to another clearing where I can see the lake. I look around everywhere, and what's really weird, I can't see the light glow that I saw earlier. It's genuinely nowhere. I was convinced that I should still at least be able to see that out of all things, but there's literally nothing. I don't get it. And the sky, it still didn't look right, but it wasn't like before. So where did the light go? I didn't have much time to focus on it, but I was truly perplexed, and this is something that I still think about now. I managed to get my torch on again, and I don't know, it sounds stupid, but I was trying to recharge whatever energy it was and fire it around everywhere, hoping to see the light again, just to know it was there. But again, I don't see anything. Now, I'm pretty spooked out now, but I have to keep going. I eventually make it into a more familiar area, and I'm actually feeling confident finally. I've adopted more of a walking pace because I was a little bit worried that if anyone was out there and I ran up on them, they might think I was trying to attack them. I do stop constantly though and look around, desperately trying to see something or anything around me, but again, I can't see anything or anyone. I was desperately hoping that I'd see a group of people just to explain what I'd seen, or at least to be able to tell somebody, but I can't see anything. The snow's picked up a little bit more now, and it wasn't pleasant. I realised too that I must have been out of here for quite a long while because the battery's virtually entirely drained on the torch. I know because it's gone pretty dim. I probably have the worst torch in the world because when the battery's low it goes really dim to conserve it, but it doesn't last very long, so what's the point? The other light that I have is far superior, but that's long gone. I decide to leave it for whatever's out there to enjoy it. I know I'm never seeing that thing again. I'm someone who usually hates losing things too, but I was so scared I didn't even think about trying to recover it. Now, the trees are getting thinner and thinner, and that gives me a pretty good idea that I'm not too far away from where I need to be now. I can't be 100% certain that I'm back to safety, but this is a pretty good indicator of it being the case. Now, I continue this walking pace and I'm constantly looking behind myself. Now momentarily, I start shaking again and don't know why. Then suddenly, I realise I hear something making a screeching sound. It's kind of at a medium volume, but it sounds like it's coming from exactly behind where I was. I'm not so worried now because with a few steps, I'm eventually back to where the forest ends, and I'm not too far from safety. I look around for anything to have been following me, but I can't see anything, and I quickly make my way over to my car. I start it up, turn the lights on full, and take one last look into the forest, and I can't see anything. I get back into my car and drive the rest of the way home, completely in shock about the whole experience. Now, I really don't know what happened to me that day, and I truly don't like sharing my story with colleagues at work because they don't really listen to me, but I know what I saw, and I don't know what it was. It could have been spiritual, it could have been anything, but I sure as hell don't have a clue what that was, and that scares me. Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing great today and enjoyed these stories. Make sure you check out my Patreon if you want to support the channel and get early access to my videos, and make sure you check out my podcast in the description below. Let me know what's your favourite story out of these, and I have a quick message before the story starts, so I'd like to share this. Remember that if you're going through a hard time and you can't see the other end of it, that's normal. And when things are tough, it's often the way that our mind goes for some reason. I know for myself, I have to calm myself down and remind myself that things aren't as bad as they seem, and they usually aren't, and focus on what I need to do to get out of the situation, and then just be consistent and have balance and do the things that I enjoy. And then in no time, you'll start to feel much better and everything will turn around, I promise. So I hope that can help some people. Take care and enjoy these stories. I'll speak to you all soon. While working as a park ranger, I made a really weird discovery. Somewhere nestled away was a small bungalow-style building on the land that we had to cover. Now it's something that I actually hadn't noticed before, so this was interesting for me. I'd worked here for quite a number of years and decided that one day, while off duty, I was going to investigate it with one of my really good friends. We've been best friends for quite a long time and we're really excited about this specific adventure. We got a bit older now, so didn't constantly go out like this, so it was really nice to. While we head out, it's quite a nice autumn day, and everything's as it should be. While walking, we encounter a group of other people, and what's really strange is we see somebody wearing all yellow. They literally look like a monk. Now we can't be absolutely certain of this, but they were definitely out of place for where we are. They basically headed off a different direction than the one that we're in, so we'll never be exactly sure. It took us quite a long time to actually find the location too. It was nowhere near where it should have been. I don't know why, it was kind of weird because we seemed to have to walk for miles and miles and never actually got close to it. However, eventually, on the horizon in a clearing, we find it, and we were ecstatic. Now, we hadn't explored anything like this before, but there were rumours that there was a really complex system under here, so we're incredibly excited when we find a small wall that we can break into. I don't suggest doing this though, because to be honest, we were probably technically trespassing and were vandalising. I mean, gosh, I work there too, but that isn't the point of now. So what happens is my friend actually goes in first because he's a bit smaller than me, so he finds it a lot easier to go through the clearing. We then wonder if this is just a normal house, as there seems to be no way to get any further. We're actually quite disappointed, until suddenly my friend says, "Hey, Bill, check this out." I turn and what do you know? There's one small hatch which has ladders down it. The ladder's actually extremely sketchy, to be honest. I don't know why I went down it first, but we actually make it. Then we're met with a huge steel door. This thing was probably built during the Cold War. It was so cool to find it. There was quite a lot of graffiti around, so we definitely weren't the first people to discover this, but it was really interesting. There was all kinds of trash in the first part. Through the steel door, however, we're met with an extremely long corridor, concrete lined with random boxes around with markings that we couldn't read anymore. We thought this was crazy. We hadn't seen anything like it before. It was like stepping back in time in the 70s. There was a strange smell too. It kind of smelled like rotten something. We presumed that animals were using this as their home and probably had died or something, but it was pretty weird. Now we continue down the corridor, and that's when we get the first feeling that we might not be alone here. Every so often, we would hear some kind of banging sound on the walls. Now we couldn't figure out exactly what was making it, because we could never seem to get close to the source of the sound. But that was the first thing that was odd. We presumed that maybe there was other people down here, so we both turned off our torches for a short while and just listened. We don't hear much of anything, so just accept that it's probably just some kind of animals, or who knows, rats or something. We continue on, and suddenly my friend's torch goes off. Doesn't matter, I've got a spare one. Now what's specifically weird though, is that this is a very good torch. It's ones that the park rangers where I am are issued, so it basically never goes out. You can also recharge it, and I'm trying to do this constantly, but it doesn't make a difference. So that's really weird. Now we're down to just one, and I know we should have headed back, but for some reason, we're just too excited and motivated to press on. But we're not really finding much, just room after room which is completely abandoned, so we're starting to get quite bored now. The other issue is we weren't really tracking where we were going, so we're basically just going deeper and deeper into who knows what, where we're never going to have cell signal or anything. We eventually come up to one area which is cut off by some kind of wardrobe pressed up against where we are. We basically can't get through the doorway. It looks like somebody's tried to barricade it, but it didn't work. We start hitting the door and trying our very best to get in, but again, it doesn't make much of a difference. That's when my torch goes out and things get real. Almost instantly, there's some kind of high-pitched noise. It kind of sounds like a distant alarm or something. And we noticed that the temperatures got so much colder than our surroundings should be. We were completely fine up until this moment, and now it feels extremely cold. Now it gets worse as we start to hear movement. It was almost like the second the torch went out, this place became alive, and we weren't alone any longer. So we explored deeper and deeper, trying now to get out, with my buddy finally getting his torch to come to life, but only extremely limited, and only for a few seconds at a time. Again, I've never seen anything like this before. Then suddenly, we hear it, the sounds of footsteps. We don't say anything, we start turning back in the opposite direction, but these footsteps sound very loud. They're definitely coming in our direction, and our torches just don't go on. We realise someone's here and we're not supposed to be, and we start going, following the lining of the wall, trying to find our way out of here, but we just can't. We cannot seem to get away from whatever this is. It seems like they're not definitely going after us, but they seem to be searching room to room trying to find someone. I say them because it sounded like there might have been more than one, but I'm not sure. I try my very best to hold my breath as we round corner after corner, not really getting anywhere. Every so often the lights come on again, and it's cold enough that you can actually see mist forming when we're expiring, which is crazy. It wasn't like this before. Unless it started snowing outside, I don't see how this could have happened, but it's autumn and it's not likely where we are. Now I whisper to my buddy that we've got to get out of here, and we finally find the long corridor. We both stop for a few seconds and my torch comes to life again. I see the silhouette of somebody and I say, "Come on, what are you doing, Brian? Turn back." Then Brian says, "Dude," and I realise he stood right next to me as I see the silhouette of somebody coming towards us, but I don't know who they are. For a second I'm frozen and my torch goes out again. I scream out a swear word and hit it, and by God knows what luck, it comes back to life again finally. And now, it's extremely bright and nobody's there, but we can still hear footsteps coming towards us. I actually drop the torch in fear and it goes out once again. I swear, and we sprint, and we're following the length of the corridor. We follow this and we know it's the way that we come in. We turn around and now make it into the main latch that we have to go through, as this is going to lead to the ladders out of there. I'm going up at absolute record speed and actually cut my hand while doing so. I'm shaking now, and suddenly I'm almost blinded by the sunlight. I quickly jump through the small gap and so does my friend. We take a second to lay on the ground and let our breaths readjust. I can actually feel on my clothes how cold they are, and again it doesn't make sense. We sit there for a second staring at each other, and we can hear it. Footsteps following once more. This time you can hear them at the bottom of the stairs towards the latch where the ladder is. We both turn and bolt it out of there. We run and eventually see some other hikers who look at us like we're absolute madmen, but maybe we were. They did not know what we had seen or what we were running from. Eventually we get back to civilization and relative safety, but I don't know what to make of this. Since this day I felt like it's kind of robbed me of some of my creative or exploratory freedom. I'm so scared to go anywhere on my own now. Even while doing that job for a few more years afterwards, I could never go in that area. Even when I was sent out there to do things, I would just lie and kind of hang around the border of it. I don't think I've been the same since this encounter. This story that I'm about to tell is from a family friend who is passionate about the subject. Now the first actually happened in 2013. The family friend, we'll call him Joe to preserve his anonymity, it's a good choice, lives on the outskirts of town, about 5 miles away from the nearest gas station. There's quite a bit of a forested area, but most of it is private property. There's a house right across the street from this, so he's not totally isolated. Anyway, one evening, Joe got done picking squash from his garden. He had put them in a bucket and he left it on the side of the porch and forgot about it overnight. The next day, he went looking for the squash and realised that he left it outside. He went out on the porch and the bucket was gone. He didn't really think too much of it. He figured a raccoon had taken it. He did find it strange, however, that whatever it was had taken the whole bucket and that none of the squash had been spilled out. It was like something big actually carried it away but took some care to not spill any of it, as opposed to rummaging throughout like a raccoon would. A few days later, Joe came home from work to find a dead mouse on his doorstep, wrapped in a leaf and some grass. He looked at it for a moment in curiosity. The mouse had been meticulously placed inside of the leaf with grass made to look like a sandwich. He then began to think that maybe somebody was messing around with him, or maybe there was some kind of witch or something in the area trying to put a curse on. Nothing else happened for about a year until one night, Joe was sitting in his living room watching television when something out of the corner of the eye catches his attention through the window around the garden. He looked out and saw a figure hunched over and looking through his squash plants. He then went outside to confront whoever or whatever the thing was. When he got outside, he was surprised by just how little noise the creature was making. It was like it was trying to hide, and he took a step on his porch, causing the wood to creak and the creature to look up at him. He couldn't get a good look at his face, but there was a distinctive shine in its eye caused by it looking up towards his porch light. It stood up on two legs, and he got a good look at its body. It was very large and bulky. He estimates that it must have been about 7 feet tall. It was black and hairy, and man-like in its form. As soon as it saw him, it bolted away into the woods with lightning pace. It didn't make a sound, really. There was no doubt in his mind that this is a Bigfoot, and Joe understood, understandably, that he was going to have trouble to fall asleep that night. As he laid awake, he begins to wonder if the creature had been in any way connected to the mouse that he received on the doorstep about a year ago. He said that he believed that the thing could have carried the bucket of squash. The next morning, Joe decided to try a little bit of an experiment. He took some turkey and rolled it up in a leaf and some grass, much like the mouse had been before, putting it on his picnic table out the lawn and gone for work. When he got back, the turkey, the leaves and grass were gone. He studied the area, but couldn't find any signs of it. Not even the grass was disturbed as far as he could tell. Then he approaches his door, and on the doorstep is another mouse, this time decapitated, and instead of leaves and grass, there was a small pile of berries next to it. He's actually not seen the creature since then, but he really strongly believes that it's what's been swapping gifts with him. It continues to the present day. When he got a whole deer antler just 4 months ago, he started setting up trail cams to try and capture that thing on video. Whatever was leaving presents, but he couldn't find anything. He's still trying to catch it, and I'll keep you posted if he finds anything. He told me that sometimes it always feels like it's watching him and will intentionally not show up when he puts cameras up, but I don't know if it's that intelligent or if it's just not actually there. Who knows if this is a Bigfoot or what it is. This all happened way back in 2017 while I was camping with my friend. He had huge farmland surrounded by forest. We were outside in the front of the farmhouse in a tent. He was asleep, but me always having insomnia, I was awake all of a sudden, but I can hear loud footsteps coming from outside of the forest over in the direction of the tent. This scares me, because I don't know what it is. A bear? A deer? I had no clue. I was waiting for the footsteps to stop outside of the tent, and I was preparing myself for the worst, because since the direction it's heading, I assume that this thing is a threat. I thought something was going to happen, but it didn't. Now, it's then heading in the direction of the other tents. That's what I assumed was going to happen. Now, it goes past my tent. After hearing these loud, slow, methodical footsteps coming out of the woods, ignore two defenseless kids, then silently pass for maybe 10 minutes, curiosity starts to eat away at me. When I was a kid, I was stupid, so I actually unzipped the tent and peeked my head outside to see if I can see anything. I'm looking all around the tree line, the house and everywhere, and I cannot find the source of the footsteps. I'm just about to put my head back inside when I spot something that doesn't really make sense to me. Behind the farmhouse to the right is the actual farm, and this is where this happened. I see a pole. I saw what looked like a 30 feet tall greyish silver pole standing next to this farm. It had this shiny glisten to it in the moonlight. I studied this weird structure up and down with my eyes confused because I knew well that I should have easily been able to notice this before, but I hadn't. It wasn't there. By the way, I call this thing a pole, but after looking at it really hard, I realised that it had arms and legs. They looked like rods, perfectly symmetrical and proportional with its size and stature. It looked so smooth and round, and it almost looked like it stretched out. It's hard to explain. It was spinning in a circle ever so slowly. I was dumbfounded and have no idea about what to think of this, and all of a sudden, this thing, this tall, shiny 30-foot spinning pole, suddenly took a step back into the woods, started spinning slowly, still glistening and shining in the moonlight. I had no idea how to react. I felt completely at a loss afterwards and just kind of went back to the tent and laid on my back until the sun comes up. I got no sleep at all after that day and never hung out with that friend again at the farm. I don't know what it is. Trick of the eye? A humanoid? Your guess is as good as mine. I believe I had an encounter in August 2005 when I was 19. I visited Point Pleasant with my friend and fiance. We were just kids being dumb. Thought it'd be a good idea to go and find the Mothman. We didn't even plan the trip out very much. We borrowed this old tent that belonged to my fiance's father, and I swear to God, it hadn't been opened since the 70s. When we made it into town, it was already dark. We stopped at a police station, and they're friendly enough, told us where to camp. Now we went down all these creepy back roads and seemed to get into more dark and desolated places while doing so. We were having a good time though, pretending to scare the life out of each other, as kids do. We're all driving down one back road just surrounded by woods. It's completely dark other than our headlights, and suddenly out of nowhere, we can see these two round eyes glowing in the sky. I know it sounds strange, but honest to God, it's what happened, and we're all terrified because of how high above the ground they are. We start screaming like girls and my fiance floored it. The initial shock and just feeling is one that doesn't escape me. My fiance recovered and wanted to set up camp. My friend and I thought that it wasn't a good idea and we refused to sleep anywhere near the woods. We ended up sleeping in the car in a hospital parking lot once we're back to civilization. We later found out the directions to the camping spot was in and around the TNT area. We had no prior information about such and barely planned it at all. We had breakfast at Biscuit World, that sounds good, the next morning, and for whatever reason chose not to share our encounter with anyone. I guess we thought that nobody would believe us if we did. We left a day early since we didn't want to try it and sleep in the car in August again. When we got home, Hurricane Katrina had made its way all the way towards the Gulf Coast. It was all over the news. Now it just struck me though, because a Mothman sighting is supposed to be the omen of tragedy and misfortune. I know it sounds crazy, but believe me, that's what we found that day. This took place in the summer of 2009. I was born and raised in the plains of Texas, specifically in an area where the black-eyed kid sightings are prevalent. I've heard the stories, tales, and legends, whatever you want to call them, since I was young, but I never truly believed them. The Black Eyed Kids was something I was mainly entertaining as a joke or something. Now, it was in a warm night in June. I was up late around 2 am, as I typically like staying up late, especially in the summer since it would stay fairly warm even after the sun gone down. I had just run up to the store to grab a big fountain drink and was returning into my home through the back door when I was approached by two children, a girl and a boy. I was very startled once I realised that they were there since I wasn't expecting to encounter anybody so late in the backyard. The little boy asked, "Can I come in? We need to use the phone and are lost." This is when I noticed the blackness of their eyes. Both of them had eyes that were so black they appear as though they're pits. Now this is also when my heart sank. I couldn't believe I was actually seeing them. They were literally right there in front of me. As I mentioned before, I heard the legends most of my life, so there was no way I was going to let them in my home. I darted into the back door and locked it as quick as I could. Once inside, I ran upstairs and flipped on the lights, trying to see if they're outside. Thankfully by then they're gone. I had so much adrenaline pumping by that point though that I grabbed a weapon and began searching the house, making sure all the doors and windows were locked. It took me hours to get to sleep that night, and it's still an encounter that stayed with me for the rest of my life. These entities took the form of something most people view as innocent, weak, mild, and tried to trick unsuspecting people to do God knows what to them. I'm just glad that my reflexes actually kicked in that day, and I'm still alive to be able to tell you the tale. A few years ago, I was outside with one of my friends after church. He looked at a nearby wooded area and saw what he claimed to be a pair of glowing eyes. This was at like 12 PM, so it couldn't have been an owl. The guy's also 2 or 3 years older than me and was really scared. I live next door to this church, so it scared the life out of me. Anybody know what it could have been? Now, I came across one of the reports concerning the Black Eyed Kids in Pennsylvania. My cousins and I had a very weird experience in September 2011. We both lived in the town of Wolverine, Michigan, and our dads are brothers. My cousin and I had been hunting and camping together since we were like 12 years old. We had graduated from high school that spring and planned to go camping later in the summer. We finally got permission to use my dad's pop-up camper and headed off. We planned to stay for a week or so at a place southwest of the city in the forest near the state park. We drove back into the woods about 4 miles off the main road and set off a small clearing. We both thought that the area looks familiar, but we can't recall exactly why. When we headed back there was this weird sound and feeling, and we both looked at each other. Now, I don't know what it was, but it made us feel odd. We didn't really have much planned to do together in the area other than hike around. Both of us were going to move away from home the next spring, so we'd likely not see each other again. I'll be honest, the camping trip was really a good excuse to get away from my girlfriend for a bit. We didn't do that much on the first night other than drinking a few beers and talk. We were in our racks early that night. The next morning, we decided to explore the area. We started at about 10 AM and headed west towards the lake. We had been walking no more than an hour when we heard what sounded like somebody yelling up ahead of us. It didn't sound like they were in trouble, so we cautiously continued walking towards the sound. After about 10 minutes or so, the yelling stopped and we never saw anyone. I had a GPS with me, so I figured we'd be able to find our way back pretty easily. We did get crossed up a few times, but we got back to the campsite late afternoon. There was a small creek nearby, so we washed up and started making dinner. And We sat to eat, and there was the sound of something moving through the trees north of us. There were lots of small animals in the area, so we figured that's what it is. A few minutes later, we heard thrashing sounds like something was sweeping at a small tree and bushes. Since we were eating, I thought maybe a black bear got wind of our food. Whatever it was, it soon stops, but every once in a while it would start up again. That night, we could hear the sweeping sound coming off from the same area, which is really odd to us. The next morning it was quiet, so we walked in the direction that the sounds come from before. We didn't see anything, but it did look like something had been kicking up the ground in a few places. We walked back to the campsite and started to eat breakfast. I just wanted coffee, so I went into the pop-up and searched for a coffee cup. As I was there, I heard my cousin saying something. I asked what he wanted. He replied that I had better get out of there. I looked through the netting and there was a tall man with a black tracksuit on standing at the edge of the clearing. I stepped out and asked the man, "Can we help you?" He just smiled and said, "Maybe I can help you." My cousin and I looked at each other and kind of laughed, but he then starts going towards us slowly. I ask what he wants, but he stopped walking about 15 feet away. Right away I realised that his eyes are totally black, and the tracksuit that he has had caked mud and dirt on it. I asked, "Who are you?" And he said, "I'm just taking a walk and meeting my people." By this time I was freaked out, and my cousin walked towards the pop-up. I knew he was going to grab his shotgun. The man got a serious look on his face, like he senses we are armed. So he turned and walked towards the woods, at the edge of the clearing, and turned and said, "I'll see you boys later," and made a laugh as he returns to the wilderness. We didn't need another confrontation like that, so we gathered up everything and hauled ourselves out of there. We did set up at another area, but it's about 70 miles south of there. We had an enjoyable couple of days, but when we get together, we still wonder who that guy was and what he wanted from us. Now for some context, this happened about 10 years ago on a hill southwest from Branquilla, Colombia. I'm kind of skeptical about a lot of things, but this, I'm absolutely sure that what I saw was real. I was camping with my Boy Scout troop in a not so friendly place. Very hot, really rough terrain, awfully humid. Our troop was more like military service than scout life. It was kind of far enough away from the main road, and the main base was in a tree-covered hill. I think that could be worth noting that it was less than 5 kilometers from an indigenous sacred site known as the Sacred Territory of the Creator, and probably it was a sacred site also, but I don't know, since the tribes that inhabited the area were forced by the Spanish to abandon their belief, traditions and language, so there's a lot of things that we don't really know about, even I being descendant from them. It was 3 p.m. We sent 3 people to the dishes after lunch. There was a small lagoon about 5 to 10 minutes downhill. It shouldn't have took more than half an hour for them to get back. An hour passes and they haven't returned. Knowing them, surely they're just having trivial fun or something and gossiping, but as a patrol leader, I have to call them back. They didn't respond to whistles, so I personally went down there to find them. The way to the lagoon is mostly a 2.5-foot path between a steep hill and a dry river that has dense vegetation. Now, I was walking carelessly until I noticed something behind a curve. At first I thought it was a massive vulture, but I felt uneasy, so I started going back in silence until I stepped over a dry branch. After the crackling, that thing extended its wing, showing a massive muscular humanoid back and a head that watches me. Then it took the sound of more like a helicopter than a bird. Nonsense, I thought, trying to come up with a rational explanation to this. Maybe it's just my imagination. I then arrived to the lagoon, and effectively, they were having the most boring and dumb of conversations. I told them to pack everything and start going back to the campsite when all the troops come out of the tree-covered area and told me that I was taking too long. But my encounter couldn't have been more than 5 seconds or so. Anyway, there was a boy who said I'll go in front and entered to the woods alone. 5 seconds later, I heard the same helicopter-like sound, and the boy came running back, hyperventilating, saying that he saw a giant birdman. Everybody laughed, but I didn't say a word. Now, today I'd like to share my story that happened quite a number of years ago, though the feelings have never really left me. I'm somebody who spent a lot of time working out in nature. I was a park ranger, so I'd always done things outside. I mean, not just while I was at work, but for other reasons too. I remembered I had some friends that were really begging me to go out to the desert with them. I had this best friend called John, and he was the one who was the most up for it. He kept on telling me about all of these crazy experiences that he had out in this particular area of the desert. He said that he would see these people, well, he kind of describes them as some kind of beings or something, and I don't know, it was linked to UFOs and things, and I'm actually sure that I saw a UFO once. I was on top of one of our towers that you use for lookouts, and I saw a light in the sky that almost appeared red then purple, then suddenly split off in 4 different directions with different sections of it going the different ways. So yeah, I was kind of up for this. I was a little skeptical. I mean, even though I'd seen a UFO, I didn't really trust my eyes, and being out there and being so bored at times, I guess your mind plays tricks on you. But this friend John kept on and on going on about it, and eventually I decided to agree. He said it was kind of like a spiritual place that you could go to, and pretty much you'd be able to talk through all of your problems with these beings and that everything would be okay. Now, don't ask me why I actually agreed to do this. I don't know, I guess I wasn't thinking at the time. I'm not someone who really gives into peer pressure too. He'd actually been going on about this for ages, and I don't know, I felt bad for always saying no, so we set out on one particular day. We parked up and made sure that we have all of our water with us, and we set off. Now, we had some camping gear with us, so we're going to be okay as long as the water didn't run too low. We decided that we'd never go far from where we parked, so that way we can always go back and get more supplies if we really need them. So with that, off we went. Now, the first area that we're going in, you can see lots of different tire tracks, and apparently, according to John, this wasn't good because it meant other people would be around, but he told me not to worry too much about this. The area that we're in is actually pretty nice. We're kind of flanked by hills, and there's kind of like a mountainy part up ahead of us. It looks really cool though, to be honest. And we continue on our hike. Now, John's actually a really good friend, and he's genuinely one of the only people that actually understands me and is very similar with me in life. We have had a few arguments, but just over silly things, and I guess this guy was more of a brother than my actual brother to me at times. Now, that meant we would talk about everything. Often it was about relationships and other things that had went wrong in our lives before, and the more we spoke, I guess the more that we realised we're similar. And again, I didn't actually know just how similar we were. I mean, heck, it was pretty unbelievable, but I won't share too many details here about that, just because it kind of goes into some of the darkness that we both seem to experience somehow at the same time, almost living opposite lives, but parallel emotionally. So we talk through everything, and he says that we're not too far from where we need to get to, and that's when we encounter the first group of people. Now, they do seem a little bit weird at first. John also seems a little bit hesitant, but he ends up going up to them and starts talking. It turns out that they're here for the same reason, and although they seem a little bit weird, we decide to try and talk to them. I wasn't sure if one of them was on something, but he just seemed too talkative. They tell us that they've got something they want us to drink, and apparently they made some nice bush tea for us. Who was I to say no, and I end up drinking it. We exchange a couple of snacks, and it was actually a really good time. Now, we'd been with these guys for quite a while and eventually decided that it's time to leave them and go on. Now, we continue on our way, and you can actually see that the path is marked by different rocks that people have put there, so we know that we're not going anywhere too dangerous or anything. My friend John constantly reminds me to drink lots of water, and I keep doing so. I seem to get a headache now, which I really can't fend off for some reason. I have pretty sensitive eyes though. I can't even look at the ground when it's bright without sunglasses, without my eyes being strained. I also get this weird thing where I kind of see like flashy lights or something, but I know what it is. It's not a migraine, but I guess it's just my eyes going weird. Sometimes I'll see a strange bright colour too, but I guess that doesn't matter too much. We come up to one part of the hike where there's quite a big drop on the left hand side of us. If we're going to fall now, we're going to be in trouble, so we really try our best to avoid this. My friend then says that we haven't got too much further to go before we get to the people, and that's when we encounter some rangers. That's really odd, I think. There shouldn't be any rangers up here whatsoever. I don't know what they're doing, and we just say hi and don't really think much of it and just keep going. They seemed a little odd, but I wasn't paying too much attention. That's when my buddy John says, "Did you notice something?" I say, "No, what's that?" He says, "Well, those guys looked almost exactly the same as each other, and I don't know, something just felt really off about them." I didn't really notice it, but trying to think of it, it almost felt like they didn't have much of a facial expression, almost like they were wearing a rubber mask, but I can't really tell. They eventually go off a little bit further, and we don't think too much of it as they slowly go out of sight. I then explained that I've heard about some twins who become park rangers in an area not far from where I was working at the time, and that, yeah, it's just basically a normal thing that you will get stuff like this. You know, you get families who are raised in the outdoors like me, and that's what the families want to do, jobs like ours. And my buddy John tells me not to worry too much and makes a joke out of it. And I tell him, "Hey, I'm not the one worried here," and we press on. Now, my friend keeps on talking to me about this thing and how great it's going to be, and eventually we set up the tents. We do this, and I keep on slamming my water. One thing that's weird is that I haven't really had the urge to urinate too much yet. Usually I'll be going like every 10 seconds almost, but I don't really feel the urge to. I guess it was hot, but the weird thing is it's not really too hot now. There's kind of an overcast in the clouds, and it means that it's not really warm, it's actually a little bit cold. But John says, "Hey, come on man, we've got to go up to this before sundown, because this hill is where you're going to see it." Now, I was either convinced that he was just off his head, or there were actually aliens here. We're nowhere near Roswell, so it wasn't anything like that, but I don't know, I've given him the benefit of the doubt. Talking to this friend though was honestly like a therapy in itself. It was almost like the ideas that I had, my friend could give me, and the ideas that he had, he could give me, and it would kind of complete each other. Not in a weird way, but just kind of like a nice bond and friendship. So yeah, it's getting a little bit dark, and I keep telling my buddy that we have to remember where the tent is because we're not going to see it. My friend doesn't take much notice of me and keeps on going. Now, he says that he's going to continue on, but I say that I feel like I need to stop for a bit. I don't know why, but suddenly the headache becomes absolutely overwhelming. Now, my friend continues on and I just let him go. Now, I feel extremely tired suddenly and I don't want to sleep, but you know when you try and lay on your side and not sleep, you know what happens? Yeah, you end up sleeping. Now, that was exactly what happened to me. I managed to wake myself up a couple of times, but I kind of drift off again. It's almost like I've got an alarm clock in my head, but I permanently had it on snooze and I wake up again. When I woke up, I felt like I'd slept for ages and almost like I'd had the best night's sleep of my life, but everything felt different now. I get up and look at the sky, and it's kind of got like an orange hue to it, and I continue on the trail and try and find where my friend is. For some reason, when I wake up, I suddenly feel much more peaceful. I wasn't concerned about finding my friend, and I presumed that he just left me there to sleep and went back to the tent, so I decided to go on myself. I drank quite a lot of water again, and I was actually running out in my first tank, which is surprising. Again, no urge to urinate, which I think is really weird, but I keep going. Now, as I'm walking, I can hear a strange humming. It was almost like a kind of energy is the best way I can describe it. I wasn't entirely sure what it was, but I knew I should keep going, and I thought maybe, just maybe, this is what John was telling me about. And I thought in the back of my head, maybe this is him up here making those sounds. I decide to continue, and I make it a bit further now. The guy's actually quite tough here, and the terrain's quite rocky now. I'm not too happy about this because I keep on whacking my shins when I'm trying to go up this thing. And also I keep getting little branches and things that are cutting up my ankles. But for some reason I'm not too bothered by this, and that's weird too, because usually I'm really worried. As I get higher and higher up, I realise something weird now. I seem to be talking to myself in my head kind of far too much. It's quite weird. It goes from very positive to suddenly very negative, and it keeps on switching between the two. And that's when I realise that something's different about the sky. The colours seem off, and the sky just seems far too bright. Now, I think this is really bizarre, but nothing too much to worry about. Again, I wasn't really thinking straight at this time. Now, I end up just walking and walking, and I don't necessarily have a destination in mind. I don't know how far I was gone for, but I see my buddy up ahead of me. At least I think it's John. I say, John, John, and he keeps on walking around the corner. I think, God, you're such an idiot. My foot was starting to hurt now, and I can't be bothered to walk quicker, but I practically force myself to power up towards him. I eventually make it there, and I realise something strange. He's just vanished. I try and figure out where that he's actually gone to, and I walk up the hill and look over it, and there he is again. John! John, I scream out, but he doesn't listen. What's weird is that he just keeps on and on walking, but he seems to be far too far away from me. Even if he sprinted down this hill, he shouldn't have been able to get this far, and I suddenly realise that I can't see him any longer. I think this is odd, and I look around, and suddenly I've realised that there's a few more people around. There's quite a lot up on a ridge, and they're all waving at me, trying to get me to come over to them. I can see that they brought some kind of dirt bike with them, and I put my hand on it, but I decide to leave it because it's theirs. I think that this is a group that we've seen earlier, so I start to go further and further. And my God, do I have a bad migraine or something, because my eyes are going a bit funny. I'm kind of seeing the weird colours again, but my vision's definitely a bit off now. I try not to think too much of it, and I reach down and realise that there's all water over my hand. I quickly start slapping around trying to figure out where the source of it's from, and notice how cold my hand is, when I realise that suddenly my hand isn't wet and it's in my head. I'm not aware that something's off at this point, and I just thought it was lucky that there's no water here. I then open up my bag and start drinking, and I realise that the heavens have opened up now. There's rain falling all around me, and it feels quite nice to be out of the desert sun. Now, I eventually make it up to the hill where all the people are waving, and it seems like they're being very friendly to me, saying good things and encouraging me. I stop to get a bit of breath and rest my legs for a few moments, and I say, hey guys, wait for me, I won't be long. And that's when I realise that my vision's gone a bit weird. It almost feels like I'm going backwards now, but I'm not. I take a few deep breaths and I become very, very conscious of my breathing. and the rain around me. This calms me a lot, and I think the deep breathing did me some good. And I'll continue on and make sure that I can see my new friends at the top of the hill. There seems to be less and less of them now, and I eventually make it all the way up there. Now when I get to the very top, suddenly something changes. It's almost like they've all just appeared around me suddenly, but as I look at them, their faces seem off, and I suddenly notice that there's something very inhuman about them. Now, their faces look much more scary, and suddenly they morph into some kind of dark figures which tower over me. I mean, it starts off with about my height until they're about 2 or 3 times taller, and suddenly they surround me. But for whatever reason, I don't feel afraid and I don't feel scared of anything. I kind of notice that they're around me, and because I can't see now, I kind of lose my balance and fall over for a second. When I fall over, I'm staring back up at the sky now. I don't feel any pain or anything, but I can see lightning bolts all around me, and the rain picks up a lot more. I wiped my eyes trying to figure out what was happening when I eventually managed to get myself up off the ground again. I'm looking around and the figures are gone. I think, my god, did I encounter them? Was that it? What did I get out of this? Did I learn anything? Did I see anything? Are they actually there? And I think that this can't necessarily be anything that I actually believe's there. And I decide that I should keep looking for John. It suddenly clicks again. Now, that's when I start to get a bit scared. I have a sudden feeling of panic, and the more that I panic, the worse I feel, and I start picking up the pace more and more. And I start to see these beings again. These are different from the ones that I've seen earlier, and they seem a lot more malicious and malevolent. The further I go, the closer they seem to come towards me. It gets to a point where I honestly feel like there's an army of them behind me, and I don't dare look around. I'm not sure how long this went on for with this weird feeling of being followed, but my god, it must have been a long time. And I can tell you that I did not feel good during 1 second of it. I was trying to loop my way back round to where the tent should be, but to be honest I had no idea of where I was going. Now, as you can imagine, this is incredibly dangerous out in the desert, especially if you're on your own, but I wasn't thinking of that. I remember eventually I was able to stop and turn around, and they're gone again. I look up in the sky for UFOs, and the stars seem to be too bright, and there seems to be too many of them. I wipe my eyes and it's rain again. I realise something's definitely off now. I start trying to hit my head, not hard, just enough to make sure I'm awake, but yes, I am. Now suddenly things seem to go straight back to normal. The raining stopped now, which I'm pretty happy about, and I continue now, but I'm no longer on the path. I'm going towards some kind of darker area now, where the sun seems to be far from me. I get here and I feel like I'm on a barren wasteland, and I call out for John. All I'm met with is echoes, and I'm convinced that he's back in the tent. I say, John, you better be in that tent and I better find you there. And I start trying to go downhill now, and that's when I fall. I don't know how it happened, but I can only imagine that my foot got snagged on a rock, and I actually fall quite a bit down, tumbling. I fall asleep again, and now I wake up and John is prodding me. At least I think it's John. I say, John, what are you doing? Confused as to who it is. And that's when I see it. One of the dark beings has found me, and there's a sea of stars behind him. And he takes me by my hand and lifts me up. Now, as he's lifting me up, I realise that I'm in some kind of different area again to where I thought I was. For some reason, this being seems a lot more friendly than the others, and seems to be guiding me away from wherever I was before. I look back and I can see the army of the others once again, and this thing just demands without saying anything that I look forward, and that's exactly what I do. Now, I keep going down pretty treacherous terrain, but this thing seems to be really helping me get through. Now, as weird as it sounds, I was pretty much having a full-on conversation with this thing in my head. It spoke in almost like a hushed tone, but kind of with more reverberation. It was like every time that it spoke, I would hear things and feel it through my body. I was asking where we were going and it said to safety, and I kept asking what's happening and it kept saying don't worry, don't worry. Now I'm not sure when it happened, but this being, whatever it is, left me and it was up to me to continue the rest of the journey. I look around and it's much further away now, pointing, trying to usher me to go forwards, and I follow it. I'm now walking pretty close to some kind of crevasse or something. Almost like a very, very small Grand Canyon's probably the best way that I can describe it, but maybe not grand because of how small it is. Again, I'm going on a pretty sheer rock face, and how I don't fall at this point is beyond me. I know that my fall was definitely real though because of the blood on my white socks. Now, it doesn't take too much longer, and a miracle happens. I can see the tent, and it's where it should be, and I can see the silhouette of something or someone in it. Is it my friend? What is it, I think to myself. Now, I'm pretty much glued to the spot, and I realise that I've been asking myself this over and over again in my head for God knows how long, until eventually I decide that I've got to will myself forward, and it's almost like I've got to will one foot ahead of the other. I eventually make it there and open the tent, and John's there. I say, John, what are you doing? He says, hi, you're back. I was getting worried about you. I say, what do you mean? He said, I thought you said you were going to come back soon and we're going to take a leak. I say, I didn't say that. You were just going up the hill. And he looks at me very confused. I then tell him about the beings, and he tells me that he saw some too, but he wasn't sure what to think of it, because he was quite tired and thought it was a dream. He then tells me that he thinks what he saw was me, and called out, but I didn't reply, so he told me to meet me back at the tent, and he fell asleep. I decided not to tell him exactly what I'd seen, and I ended up crashing out. Now, I woke up again the next morning, and my God, did I feel terrible. My body felt like absolute crud, and I decided the best thing to do is slam lots of water. I feel a lot better, and suddenly my heart starts pounding. Suddenly, all of my senses come flooding back to me, and the fear, this terrible fear of realizing what had happened the night before, comes back to me. I let out a loud gasp and grab my friend John, who is still sleeping. I shake him awake, and it looks like he's just seen a ghost because of the way that I've awoken him. I then explain everything that happened to him, and that's when it hits us. Something was definitely off last night. I explain my story, and he then tells me his, and we weirdly both describe the beings as being almost exactly the same as each other, and we have this horrible feeling of dread, like something's really off. My friend John now realizes that he definitely didn't understand what actually happened to me, and that it's weird because we have different stories of how we lost each other. We decide that we need to go back and make sure that we stay nice and hydrated because we're going to move quick, and we quickly pack up the things. Now, I can't describe to you the feeling of dread that I had when I packed up everything and I start heading back with John. I was absolutely convinced that it was paramount that we were about to be followed by those beings. Now, I have to tell you, in this moment, it was so real. What I'd seen and experienced is truly like nothing else I've ever seen on Earth before. And I don't know, in the moment I was kind of in this trance, so I just guess I went along with it. I remembered every time that I'd see a bush or tree that was darker than the rest, I almost had a mini heart attack. But I kept going. I didn't have a choice. The weird thing is too that the landscape all looked different from the way we'd come in. Luckily though, John knew the way, and eventually we make it back to the rocks which had been put there by others to mark the way. Now, neither of us say anything. We're both very, very, very paranoid and constantly looking around, trying to see if there's anything there, or any kind of explanation for what we'd just seen. We start talking a bit, and that's the more scared we get, the more we try and match up what had happened. Now, eventually we do make it back, and my god, getting back to being inside a vehicle was probably the best feeling in the world. I was actually so shaken up that I couldn't drive though, and I just had to lock the doors and just lay in the seat for a while, trying to think of what had happened. Had we been drugged? My buddy John then says that he thinks that we were probably drugged and that those guys probably spiked us with something that we ate or drank. He said it sounded like a weird drug that he had heard about before that can make you hallucinate, and apparently the plant for it and seeds are actually quite common in nature, and he thinks they probably got it from here and thought it'd be funny to do it and not tell us. I was convinced of the same thing because the whole thing just felt so weird. God, how could they be so evil to us? I mean, we literally could have died. We could have ended up like those hikers who went out into the wilderness and just disappeared. What really worried me is the fact that we got separated out here, completely out of our minds, both of us. Now, anything could have happened to me. I checked for bruises and I didn't have a headache or anything, but I could have easily fell, hit my head, and got brain bleeding or something. I don't know, it's just too easy to happen out here. But the thing that neither of us understand is, how do we get back? We both agree that we're probably miles away from each other at some point, because at the very least, we should have heard each other screaming out, but we didn't hear a thing. And the rest of the drive back was a pretty weird one. This is when the both of us discovered that we had also seen the rain before, but the area around us didn't seem to be too wet. I mean, yeah, it is a desert, so it could have just evaporated, but I don't know. It just felt a little bit different somehow. And eventually we get back. Now we make it to John's mum's house, and John's mum says, "God, you guys must have seen it. Surely you guys seen it. Tell me you did. It was right where you guys were staying." We look at each other very concerned. Was this the first that the beings had been actually reported or what? And his mum then says, "Did you see the UFO? I saw it. So many of our neighbours saw it." I say, "What do you mean?" Getting a little bit angry. She says, "The UFO. So many of us saw it. Those weird flashing lights in the sky. It was almost like a big triangle with red glowing orbs under it. It went over to roughly where you guys were staying in the desert. Then a few more appeared, and it was there in the same place for about a good half an hour." My heart drops now. Apparently it was accompanied by a quick storm, and suddenly they just shot off, never to be seen again that night. Apparently hundreds of people had all seen the same thing, and the timeline pretty much matched up to when we got over there. Now, me and John looked at each other, and we went off into his room and sat down for a while. We made some tea, and just kind of stared at each other, not knowing what to say. Now, it's been quite a while since this experience, and I don't know, I could have very easily been drugged with my friend, but the fact that a lot of what we had seen matched up with each other, and the other fact that so many people had seen something in the sky that night exactly where we are, it just seems a little bit weird. It just doesn't feel right. I don't know.